Chapter 981, Test Subject Selection. So starlight pollution needed to be studied, but not in front of Douglas. Saul resealed the shell and handed it to Alec. No good. My research on black tide pollution cannot yet handle the starlight pollution on it. Moreover, I see that the Stargate's current containment methods cannot effectively control the pollution on it. Over time, the pollution might spread again. Alec was slightly disappointed but still took the shell. You're contacting this form of pollution for the first time, so it's normal not to have a solution immediately. We'll collect data from this shell, then crush it and cast it outside the Stargate. Don't worry about the pollution on it. So they were using the Stargate as both an escape pod and a garbage disposal. Saul handed over the contaminated shell, but kept his own tentacle. He had already scanned himself with mental power and found no signs of starlight pollution contamination. Even the severed tentacle showed no signs. I really do have some connection with this starlight pollution. Saul temporarily suppressed the doubts in his heart and followed Douglas to look at the experimental data on Alec's side. Seeing Saul approach, Murich tried hard to maintain an expressionless face, but his fingers couldn't help contracting slightly. The other wizards naturally noticed Murich's nervousness, but everyone pretended not to see it. This time's data has achieved breakthrough progress. It can be said that if the test subject's soul body wasn't too low-level, they should have been able to return alive. Another third-rank wizard whose name was unknown suggested, "Next time, let's use a second-rank wizard's soul body." But at this moment, Alex sitting at the head said, "Use a third-rank wizard's soul body directly." Many people became restless, because all the people participating in the experiment were third-rank wizards. When they were asked to use lower-rank wizards' soul bodies for experiments before, they hadn't reacted much. But now immediately mentioning the third-rank wizard level meant one of them might become a test subject. After all, even in the Stargate Council, third-rank wizards weren't everywhere. Moreover, after Red Worm screening, quite a few third-rank wizards had been devoured, ultimately becoming pitiful parasitized corpses like Wizard Ole. Chairman, wouldn't using third-rank wizard soul bodies directly be too hasty? We haven't confirmed the experiment's reliability yet. Using second-rank wizards would be meaningless, Alex said calmly. After all, they don't have departure slots. This was the first time Chairman Alec clearly indicated he would only take third rank and above wizards when leaving. Everyone present couldn't help discussing in low voices. Seeing everyone's commotion, Alec didn't shout sternly or speak to comfort them, but instead threw the topic to Saul, successfully diverting everyone's attention. "Wizard Saul, who do you think is suitable to be the next test subject?" Swish, swish, swish. All eyes turned to look at once. Even Douglas looked over with interest. Saul held his chin and wasn't intimidated. "Actually, I'm quite interested in this experiment. If possible, I'd even want to be the test subject myself." His words immediately made everyone's first reaction disbelief. Saul ignored the others. "But my mental power is already close to fourth-rank wizard level, so there's no reference value. The pollution my mental power can resist, other third-rank wizards present might not all be able to." Aside from Alec, the others weren't very clear that Saul's mental power could match fourth-rank wizards. They knew Saul's mental power was very strong, but weren't clear exactly how strong. Hearing Saul say this for the first time, most people instinctively didn't want to believe it. But seeing that Chairman Alec showed no disagreement at all, they could only bitterly accept this fact. So many third-rank wizards present weren't as powerful as a third-rank wizard, who had only advanced a few years ago. Moreover, his mental power had already caught up to fourth-rank wizards, which meant that barring accidents, Saul would definitely become a fourth-rank wizard in his lifetime. At this moment, Murich lowered his head and completely didn't dare look at Saul. Seeing their reactions, Saul only found it amusing. Besides me, actually Wizard Douglas is also suitable. At these words, the Stargate Council wizards were somewhat surprised, but also relieved. They simultaneously observed Douglas's reaction to see if he would clash with Saul in internal strife. But disappointing the wizards, the smile on Douglas's face hadn't changed at all. He still had that composed appearance. Instead, Alec asked, "So you recommend Wizard Douglas?" "Not exactly. After all, Wizard Douglas isn't participating in the migration plan. Having him leave with you would disadvantage those staying behind, wouldn't it?" Saul smiled again. Seeing others anxious was quite satisfying. "I'd recommend Wizard Murich more. I wonder if Chairman Alec is willing to part with him." Hearing Saul finally recommend Murich, the other wizards all felt this was as expected. After all, everyone in the Stargate now knew Saul extremely disliked Murich. Murich kept his head down with a relatively calm expression. Sure enough, Chairman Alec didn't agree to Saul's recommendation. Murich is one of the plan's leaders. Much data also needs to be observed through his special eyes. The migration plan can't do without him. Since the candidates you recommended, Saul, are all unsuitable, I'll just randomly pick someone. As soon as he finished speaking, Alec pointed to a third-rank wizard present. "It's you. Go back and prepare. First, conduct soul projection experiments to ensure soul body stability." The suddenly named wizard's face turned white instantly. He never expected that while eating melon, the melon would fall on him. But facing the gaze of Chairman Alec and other wizards, he couldn't say a single no, and could only nod somewhat stiffly, get up and go back to prepare. Nightmare Butterfly, who always enjoyed watching others' misfortunes, was delighted. "Ha ha ha, look, Brother Saul. Placing the burden of their hopes on others naturally comes with the day of being casually abandoned." Penny was getting bolder now. When Saul was still a wizard apprentice, it didn't dare make a sound in front of Gorsa. Now that Saul's mental power matched fourth-rank wizards, it dared laugh loudly in front of Alec. Having watched the excitement, Saul stood up, straightforwardly closed the diary in his mind, directly cutting off Penny's laughter. "Since the candidate is decided, we'll head back first. Notify us when the next experiment begins." At this moment, Murich unexpectedly stood up. "Wizard Saul, Wizard Douglas, this experiment owes much to your help. I think that, although the final experiment hasn't been conducted yet, it's time to take you both to see the Red Worm Queen." Chapter 982, First Sight of the Queen. Unexpectedly, the Queen wasn't in the hidden world side controlled by the Stargate, but in the underground base that Saul and Agu had once visited. But upon reflection, Saul understood. They couldn't put living red worms and the Queen too close together, as that would lose control over the red worms. And if the Queen had sufficient intelligence, seeing so many red worms in deactivated states, she probably wouldn't obediently allow herself to be controlled by the Stargate Council as before. Saul and his group transferred from the laboratory to the underground base. The person who greeted him was again an unexpectedly familiar face. "Corey." Saul looked back at the Stargate wizards, who had followed him. Alec naturally hadn't come. "Saul." Corey was always expressionless, but now she revealed a slightly bitter smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Has your consciousness recovered?" Seeing Corey's appearance, Saul knew she had escaped the abnormal state from the port city. "Yes. After meeting you, I originally wanted to pass information about red worms to you, but was taken away halfway." Corey led Saul toward the interior of the base. "Only after being brought here did I learn I had always been monitored by the Stargate Council. I was an observation subject for several years." Corey had originally been trying hard to report to the Glare family, but later learned that the people controlling her were from the Stargate Council, where the Glare family belonged. Even some high-ranking wizards in the Glare family had participated in the Stargate's migration plan. Other clan members had almost all retreated to the Glare world side and no longer went out. Only I, because I passed the red worm test, was finally brought back here. But at least you survived. Saul didn't judge the actions of Glare and the Stargate. Are you responsible for watching over the Queen here? Yes, after observing me for a while, the Stargate found my willpower was decent and could resist the Queen's mental influence, so they arranged for me to work here. Actually, calling it an arrangement was no different from imprisonment, since she wasn't allowed to leave the underground base. Red worms don't affect people's minds, but the Queen has this ability. Saul immediately caught the key information. Corey nodded. We analyzed that this should be the Queen's unique self-protection ability. Other red worms didn't inherit this ability from the Queen. Fortunately, they don't have this ability. Otherwise, the Stargate would have become their test subjects instead. Saul kept talking with Corey about red worm matters, while Douglas beside them seemed more interested in Corey. You're that wizard who was brainwashed several times by Stargate Council wizards, but could always break free. This was Corey's first time meeting Douglas. For some reason, looking at this man with a peaceful expression, she felt somewhat nervous. This emotion came inexplicably. She felt natural fear and wariness when facing enemies stronger than her, but facing Douglas was groundless nervousness. I don't know why I can break free either, Corey said very quietly. That must be because your mental power is rather special. You major in light attribute magic, right? Yes. We can study this later. The clearer your self-understanding, the better you can help yourself advance. Your current urgent reliance on external things for advancement is actually trapping you in difficulties. Corey was stunned. She had been unable to advance to third rank because she couldn't gather enough resources to push open the door inside her body. She never expected that today a wizard would tell her that understanding herself was more important than utilizing external factors. Could it be that she didn't understand herself well enough? If she really could push open that door directly through herself, why would she have wasted so many years? But Douglas spoke so confidently that Corey couldn't help wanting to believe once more. What if he could provide her with advancement ideas? Saul listened quietly on the side. Only after Corey nodded in agreement did he say, "Then I'll take a look too. Wizard Corey and I have fought together before, so I know her fairly well." Corey naturally had no objections. Having Saul beside her made her feel more at ease. While talking, the group had already reached the warehouse where the Queen was located. A pure white giant warehouse. At this moment, Agu in the diary suddenly spoke up in reminder. "Master, this is the warehouse where Murich killed Fiona." I know. Saul didn't hesitate and followed Corey inside. The warehouse interior was also completely white, showing no trace that someone had been beheaded here. Corey walked to the center of the warehouse, asked others to enter, then activated magical formations to close the warehouse door. The Queen is beneath this warehouse. After entering the lower level, using mental power is strictly forbidden to avoid causing the Queen to riot. Corey finally explained the precautions for entering the lower level to everyone. Only after all had indicated understanding did she activate the magical formation beneath their feet. The formation lit up with a faint glow, the same as the formation Fiona had used to surround Agu, except this time no dark arcs appeared. Instead, the ground continuously moved and deformed, forming a downward staircase within seconds. Saul followed Corey down. Because he needed to carefully restrain his mental power, he could only observe with his eyes, but even with just his eyes now, he could see many things. As his vision gradually sank below the floor, a huge water pool first appeared before his eyes. The underground space was very large, with many facilities and several wizards and apprentices. But what most attracted attention was the huge water pool in the distance. The water in the pool was very murky, with the surface gently undulating. During his descent on the stairs, Saul saw a huge white egg underwater. He had seen similar eggs in the Star Observatory Tower's laboratory. Those were new carriers combining deactivated red worms with faceless ones, also stored in liquid. But this one gave Saul a completely different feeling. The other eggs were all dead. This one was alive and had obvious aggressiveness. The moment Saul saw it, its shell also suddenly bulged outward. Corey, who had been walking down steadily, immediately quickened her pace, almost running down the stairs. Saul stood in place, letting others speed past him. Something seems to have gone wrong. Douglas leisurely walked to the same step as Saul. This is the queen they value so highly. It feels not very impressive. Saul watched the queen in the water pool. She was still struggling violently, and several wizards had already jumped into the water, using some unknown method to pacify the queen. "Don't say that," Saul said quietly to Douglas. "This is something we paid no small price to obtain. Don't curse others while cursing yourself too." Cough, cough. Douglas coughed lightly twice and stopped talking. Saul thought, was the queen so agitated just now because she discovered me? Or can she detect the star-shaped eyes hidden on my body? Chapter 983. Target is the Queen. Although the Stargate Council had invited Saul to visit, they weren't yet ready to let Saul and Douglas take over any experiments or maintenance related to the Queen. Saul naturally knew it wasn't time yet, so he didn't insist. Following the guidance of other wizards, he left the underground base. "What a pity," Douglas sighed while crossing his arms. "Please rest assured, once the Queen's condition stabilizes, we'll invite you both to visit again at the first opportunity." Douglas smiled without saying anything. Saul watched from the side, feeling that Douglas wasn't regretting not being able to visit the Red Worm, but rather regretting not being able to study Corey's mental power. After all, Corey was now the main wizard stabilizing the Red Worm, and couldn't possibly leave with Wizard Douglas. "I'll head back first." Although Saul hadn't been able to observe the Queen up close, he had gained some important information and planned to go back and share it with Byron and the others. After polite farewells, Saul's figure immediately disappeared. The next second, Saul returned to Byron's residence. Byron and the other consciousness bodies hadn't left, waiting in the room. They knew Saul would be participating in the Stargate Council's migration experiment today, so they had been waiting at home for Saul to bring back first-hand information. So when Saul's figure suddenly appeared before Byron, Byron immediately stood up and asked, "How did it go?" "The experiment is feasible, but the soul body inside couldn't last long before mutating. I tried to clear the pollution on the shell, but failed." Saul briefly explained the migration experiment's contents, then shifted the topic to the visit to the Red Worm Queen. "After this successful experiment, the Stargate Council people indeed gave us a little sweetener. Murich proposed visiting the Queen. The location is beneath the white warehouse in the underground base that Agu visited. However, just as I saw the device containing the Queen, she suddenly rioted, and the visit was forced to end." Hearing news about the Red Worm Queen, Byron was indeed excited. He frowned. Why would the Queen suddenly riot? "It might be related to me, but I can't be certain yet. However, I'll strive to see the Queen again as soon as possible. When that time comes, I'll bring you along, and you bring the half-elf." Byron was stunned. "You want the half-elf to enter the Queen's body?" The red worm on Byron's body, which was taller than him, was a body he had prepared for the half-elf. But he hadn't expected Saul to want the half-elf to enter the Queen's body. "Wouldn't that be too risky?" "Our current situation doesn't allow us not to take risks. Moreover, if red worms have a queen, they might also obey the queen's commands. Rather than using safe methods, it's better to be more aggressive, since our enemies won't wait for us to develop slowly. In the dream's apocalypse, even Iskaper had fallen into the abyss, so the fate of the other two continents probably wasn't much better. And the Saul and others in the dream had definitely made tremendous efforts to resist the Black Tide apocalypse. Even so, they ultimately failed. This meant their preparations weren't enough, not enough to keep them all alive. Then they needed to be even more extreme. What deactivated red worms, creating them, still required wizards' lives and considerable time. The quantity would definitely be unsatisfactory. So add non-deactivated red worms too. This way the number of red worms could at least double. Although non-deactivated red worms might not obey his commands, Saul only needed these cannon fodder to consume the Black Tide's powerful pollution. He didn't need them to be very obedient. The deactivated red worms could be used for fine-tuning, executing more detailed tasks. Seeing Saul's expression suddenly become somewhat heavy, Byron didn't say more this time and nodded directly. "Then I'll follow your lead." After a pause, Byron added, "I'll talk to the half-elf." But as soon as he finished speaking, Byron tilted his head as if hearing something, then immediately continued, "He agrees." Saul smiled. It seemed the half-elf also understood that if he truly wanted to save those elf consciousnesses trapped in the world barrier, merely parasitizing a small red worm wouldn't be enough. To want greater benefits naturally required taking greater risks. With everyone in agreement, Saul summoned all the consciousness bodies. "From now on, you'll need to prepare to get busy too." Bait, Wind Sprite, Agu and Herman all nodded in unison. "Yes, master." Saul's gaze swept over the first two. This time, even those two were unreservedly calling him master. But he said nothing, simply nodding briefly, "Go." The four consciousness bodies immediately left in four different directions. When Saul closed his eyes, he could feel their fate lines dancing before him. Time is a bit tight. We still need to make the Stargate Council's actions even faster. A month had passed since the first failed visit to the Queen. In one experiment, Saul suddenly found the problem in combining red worms with faceless one materials, directly transforming the originally egg-shaped carrier into worm-shaped. That is, he had turned the red worm into a flesh-colored worm, much like the harmless vegetable worms in gardens. But this change in external form directly raised the fusion level between the carrier and wizard soul by a whole step. Even Alec couldn't help looking at Saul with surprise several times. This improvement looks like just changing a very small parameter in the fusion, but in fact, this requires thousands or tens of thousands of attempts to hit one effective improvement. How did you manage to find this parameter within a month? "Good luck," Saul said honestly. He certainly wouldn't say his good luck was trying it out in the diary for half a month. Douglas's mouth corner slightly curved, then quickly flattened. Alec knew Saul didn't want to reveal the real reason, so he didn't pursue it further. If time wasn't so tight, giving the Stargate several years or over a decade to slowly experiment, they could also find this parameter, so the process of how Saul found it wasn't that important. "Your luck has always been good," Alec replied meaningfully. "When will the third-rank wizard practical experiment begin?" Saul asked. He was accelerating progress naturally to make the Stargate migration experiment's overall progress faster, so he could get red worms sooner. "Naturally, we start now." Alec didn't dawdle either, directly having Murich bring the previously designated third-rank wizard. That unlucky third-rank wizard had already prepared for soul separation. Although he was pale-faced when first designated, a third-rank wizard's mind naturally wouldn't be particularly fragile. These past days he had adjusted his state, preparing to face the experiment in his best condition. Only this way could he increase the probability of returning alive. The Stargate wizards acted with particularly high efficiency. On the very afternoon Saul completed the improvement, they had all materials and facilities for the second practical experiment prepared. Everyone once again came through teleportation arrays to the Stargate's location at extreme high altitude. Using teleportation arrays was also the Stargate Council's method of hiding the Stargate's location. The third-rank wizard who had completed initial adaptation to the new carrier suddenly manipulated his flesh-worm-like body to turn back and request of Alec, "Chairman, if I lose control and mutate like the last experiment's wizard, could you save me once? I'll try hard to recover my sanity." Alec didn't even look at the test subject, replying coolly, "Yes." Chapter 984, Heavy Precautions. Alec's agreement, given how much he valued experimental materials, surprised many people. Surprise aside, other procedures continued in an orderly manner. Soon, the third-rank wizard's soul and carrier were cast into the Stargate. Saul stood at the outermost edge of the experimental area, watching a half-meter-long flesh-colored worm pass through an imperceptible point in the night sky and suddenly disappear. Even mental power couldn't detect its existence. This was Saul's second time seeing the Stargate, but it was as if he hadn't seen it at all. Mental power should be able to scan the Stargate's location, but that would be too obvious. The Stargate people wouldn't allow it. Just as Saul was hesitating whether to probe with fate lines, Murich suddenly came near him and said respectfully, "Lord Saul, the Queen has recovered stability. Would you like to go over now? We can also cooperate with you on some testing experiments." "Now." Saul looked toward the Stargate's direction. "Seems your experiment went smoothly, so now you're rushing people away." Saul bluntly exposed Murich's true purpose. Then he saw Murich break out in a cold sweat. "No need to be nervous." Saul turned and walked away. "Hasn't your chairman always been protecting you? Let's go. I'm actually not very interested in your Stargate." This time Murich didn't even dare escort them, directly having another third-rank wizard send Saul and Douglas away. Once the two figures disappeared from the teleportation array, Murich immediately returned to Alec's side. "Chairman, are you really going to hand over the Red Worm Queen to Saul and the others? What are you afraid of?" Alec continued watching the Stargate as he had for the past decades. Murich's eyes contracted. Given their current understanding of the migration plan, won't they also leave the wizard world through red worms in the future? I'm worried that if they're carelessly noticed by some existence using the same disguise method, might they also bring us trouble? Unless they also have dozens of faceless ones. "Chairman, Saul has Gust's soul body. That guy was once the strongest among faceless ones. Perhaps he has clues about other faceless ones. Should I find another way to draw him out?" There's a hidden connection between Gust and Saul. Saul majors in dark attribute magic, so his control over soul bodies must exceed your imagination. Your actions might instead arouse his vigilance. Murich lowered his head and said no more. Sensing his subordinate's unwillingness, Alec chuckled lightly. "Are you afraid Saul will make a move against you? Don't worry, no matter how much he detests you now, he only dares mock you verbally. Just don't appear alone in front of him." Murich naturally wasn't willing to be humiliated by Saul repeatedly. Although he started the provocative behavior, as a third-rank wizard, he couldn't tolerate being repeatedly trampled and humiliated by Saul of the same rank. "Yes," Murich helplessly lowered his head. Regardless, Saul didn't dare kill him. After returning from the Stargate, Saul sent a signal below the Star Observatory Tower. When they came to the underground base again, Byron was already waiting nearby. The guiding wizard knew Byron, but hadn't expected Saul to bring a second-rank wizard along. Anyway, the Stargate will hand over red worms to us eventually. Do you still care who I bring to research? Saul said jokingly, then pushed the other party to continue forward. You're right. I imagine the chairman wouldn't object to you bringing subordinates in either. The third-rank wizard considered for a moment and still agreed. Seeing the other party easily agree to let him enter the underground base together, Byron's tense shoulders relaxed slightly. At this moment he heard Saul's secret speech. Don't worry, the current Stargate is no longer the Stargate of before. After deciding to abandon the wizard world's foundation, they've long lost their former restraining power over subordinates. Byron nodded in understanding. Alec was definitely aware of this too, he just didn't care. Who cares whether garbage about to be discarded gets buried in soil or burned by fire? Following the familiar route back into the underground base to the deepest white warehouse. Before entering underground, Saul not only restrained his soul body, but also cast a layer of aura-concealing magic around himself. Then the guiding wizard went down first. Whether Saul's protection took effect, or the queen had been completely pacified by the Stargate, this time when Saul saw the murky pool water and the giant egg inside, the queen inside didn't riot. Corey, who had been guarding by the pool, also quietly sighed in relief. Today Corey wasn't wearing a gorgeous puffy dress, but had changed into black form-fitting jumpsuit and deep purple shirt, though the collar and cuffs still had large ruffles and lace, maintaining her usual clothing style. Seeing Saul approach, she proactively handed him notebook materials. I was afraid of problems today, so I didn't go outside to greet you. Saul waved his hand. No need to greet anyway. Next time I can come in by myself. Saul and Douglas quickly browsed the notebook's contents. It recorded some of the Queen's habits and theoretical methods for controlling her. But what was given to Saul currently was only theory, not yet details. Obviously, the Stargate planned to wait until they completely left before handing the Red Worm Queen to Saul. There was also the disgusting approach of only handing over the Queen without control methods. But Saul didn't care. He definitely wouldn't use the Stargate Council's methods to control the Queen. A queen that could only lay eggs and hatch larvae red worms in the pool wasn't what Saul wanted. Byron and I will go down for a look. After speaking, Saul turned back to Douglas. Want to come together? But Douglas had already pulled over a nearby chair to sit down, saying unhurriedly, "So many people have already gone down, I'm not needed. I'll wait here for your data." Saul found that Douglas often didn't like conducting experiments personally. He preferred getting data for experimental analysis and calculations. When calculating formulas, he wouldn't use instruments or pen and paper, just analyzing in his mind. Yet his conclusions basically matched Saul's deductions. Corey was somewhat troubled. The water in this pool has very special composite components. Every drop is extremely precious. Going underwater is fine, but after coming up, everything needs to be recovered without waste. Seems this pool water is the Stargate's important reliance for trapping the Queen. Saul walked to the pool's edge and crouched down to observe carefully. How do you recover all the pool water? With this. Corey had an apprentice bring out a glass dish with a leech-like worm wriggling in the center. What is this? Saul looked down at the worm inside, discovering this leech-like creature actually had mouths at both ends. The worm in the glass dish lay quietly, unclear whether alive or dead. According to our analysis, it should be cocoons formed when the Queen lays eggs. I want to take one back, Saul said directly. This, Corey had no such authority and could only look at the third-rank wizard who had brought Saul. The latter could only bite the bullet and say, "Sorry, Lord Saul. The chairman's meaning is that you can only observe here now. You cannot participate in experiments or take anything away." Bringing other people in was acceptable, but taking away important materials, No. Saul returned the glass dish to Corey without making things difficult for them, asking seemingly casually, "After going underwater, we need to use this kind of worm to clean the pool water from our bodies, right?" Corey still expressionlessly nodded. Saul smiled. "Fine, I agree, let's go underwater." Chapter 985. Experimental Great Success. Saul felt a sense of belonging and security like entering a mother's embrace, although he could no longer clearly recall what his mother's embrace was like. No wonder the Stargate Council chose Corey to care for the Queen. Most third-rank wizards don't have time, while other low-rank wizards can hardly resist the Queen's hallucinatory influence on them. Saul and Byron went underwater together, accompanied by a wizard apprentice to help guide them. After entering the water, Saul noticed the giant egg containing the Queen moved once, though not violently. It only moved a second time when he approached close enough to almost touch it. Saul was about to reach out and touch it directly when the nearby wizard apprentice hurriedly waved her hands, signaling him not to touch as it might affect the Queen's condition. Seeing the female apprentice's frightened yet obligated to remind expression, Saul couldn't help but develop a mischievous mood. He would occasionally pretend to touch the Queen's shell, then watch the little apprentice's face constantly change expressions. Douglas and Byron acted as if they didn't see Saul's sudden mischief, just observing the Queen from half a meter away as the Stargate required. On shore, Corey and the other third-rank wizard looked at each other, not knowing why Saul had suddenly started teasing the little apprentice. "Corey, did Wizard Saul treat you like this before too?" the third-rank wizard asked quietly. "No, he didn't. Back then he had other companions." Corey's expression darkened. She hadn't thought about pleasing Saul at that time either. Corey looked at the female apprentice in the pool. She appeared to be only 15 or 16 years old. Could Saul prefer the cute type? She looked down at the ruffles on her chest. Although she also liked gorgeous and cute clothes, her personality had nothing to do with cute. Corey blinked expressionlessly and finally suppressed the inexplicable thoughts that had risen in her heart. For wizards, having a brain was enough. Being cute or not didn't matter. While Saul was teasing the female apprentice, Byron's eyes had already become vacant. His face suddenly became extraordinarily charming in an instant. But because this change was silent, everyone else's attention was drawn to Saul's sudden actions, and no one noticed Byron's abnormality. This change didn't last long either. When Douglas's gaze suddenly shifted from Saul to Byron, it had already ended. When Douglas looked over and found no abnormal actions from Byron, his eyebrows furrowed slightly with some confusion. What exactly was Saul doing? Even Douglas couldn't see through Saul's intentions now. The visit didn't last long. The approach of strangers seemed to make the Queen uneasy again. When the female apprentice discovered the giant egg's abnormal indices were about to exceed limits, she immediately guided Saul and the others to leave. After several people came ashore, other wizard apprentices immediately surrounded them with towels covered in leech-like double-headed worms, wrapping each person up. After a few minutes, they were released. When the towels were removed, everyone's entire body, including clothes, had become dry and clean. How were everyone's observation results this time? Corey stepped forward, her tone somewhat strange. "Apart from confirming it's the Queen, there were no other gains," Saul shrugged. The nearby third-rank wizard smiled and approached. "Should I have that apprentice go back with you to report the situation?" Saul also smiled. "No need." After speaking, he walked out without looking back. Byron followed closely behind Saul. Only Douglas extended an invitation to Corey. "Wizard Corey, do you have time to explore the self together?" Corey immediately became nervous and hurriedly found an excuse. "Sorry, I still need to handle the Queen. When I have time, I'll invite both you and Wizard Saul together." Corey was very worried Douglas wouldn't agree, but he nodded understandingly. "Then I'll wait for your message." After leaving the underground base, Saul immediately teleported with Byron to an inn in Olga Duchy. Bate had already booked a room here. "How was it, any gains?" Saul asked. Byron nodded, unable to suppress his excitement. The half-elf has already established preliminary contact with the Queen. So fast, Saul hadn't expected this either. Yes, for them, the flow of consciousness is very fast. Only they can guarantee precise task execution under such rapid actions. Bate didn't know much about elves, let alone half-elves she had never even seen. What kind of preliminary contact is it? What can it accomplish? Byron looked at this true third rank who had become obedient. After the elves disappeared, people always avoided contact with elf-related objects, because excessive contact might connect with the elf group consciousness. Once this connection exceeds limits, the soul would be directly pulled by elves into the world's interlayer, while the remaining body would lose control and mutate from contact with the world barrier. Now the half-elf has established a connection on the Red Worm Queen. After the connection continues to strengthen, the Queen will connect with elf consciousness in the world barrier. The half-elf can then follow this connection to temporarily return to this world, thus entering the Red Worm Queen's body to control all red worms. The last sentence was said by Saul. Although Bate had no heart, it didn't prevent her from seemingly hearing thump-thump sounds in her chest cavity. Elves and red worms, won't combining these two terrifying creatures produce something frightening? Byron actually had the same concerns, but since Saul had already decided, he just needed to follow through. As for Saul, "I'm afraid they're not strong enough. If they're not strong enough, how can they counter the Abyssal Eye?" Bate was someone who had hidden in the inverted tree for over 100 years to recover her third rank. Her personality leaned more toward steady progress. Wouldn't this be too risky? Might it cause internal losses before the Abyssal Eye fully erupts? Perhaps we could consider going slower, first having the half-elf establish contact with ordinary red worms. But Saul firmly shook his head. "No, we don't have that much time." At this moment, Saul suddenly received a sensation. He immediately teleported back to the Star Observatory Tower, where he had left a temporary coordinate point. As soon as he entered the Star Observatory Tower, he heard wizards throughout the high tower cheering and celebrating. Several low-rank wizards with smiling faces were running through staircases and corridors, sharing exciting good news with each other. The migration experiment succeeded. The experiment succeeded. We can soon leave this hellish place and enter Starry Sky. My God, that's wonderful. From now on we can also travel through Starry Sky. Our limits will finally not be restricted to fourth rank. Saul was stunned, standing in place. The first practical experiment using a third-rank wizard's soul had succeeded. Had it completely succeeded? Did this mean Alec and the others would soon take large amounts of resources and completely leave the wizard world? Saul looked at the excited low-rank wizards and apprentices before him, seeing the smiles and tears on their faces, and sighed silently. These people didn't yet know they weren't on the personnel list that Alec would take with him when leaving. "Lord Saul," a second-rank wizard recognized Saul. "We succeeded." Saul looked up at the elderly wizard before him, who was so excited he was crying, and suddenly displayed an extremely brilliant smile on his face. "Yes, it's really wonderful." Chapter 986, Work Handover. Thus, in the following 6 months, the Stargate conducted a third and fourth practical experiment. These 2 experiments did not invite Saul and Douglas to participate. But that was understandable, since the experiments had already become clear. Why let outsiders interfere? After the fourth experiment, Alec finally had to take the final and most important step before leaving. he would detach from his original body and directly merge into the incomparably massive red worm body wrapped around the outside of the Star Observatory Tower. He also didn't notify Saul and Douglas about this matter. Without the Stargate research assignments, Saul went to check on the Red Worm Queen several more times. The Stargate gradually relaxed its restrictions on Saul. Eventually, Saul no longer needed anyone to guide him and could directly enter and exit the White Warehouse, imprisoning the Worm Queen, gradually figuring out the composition of the liquid in the pool water confining the Worm Queen. However, the Stargate never allowed Saul to directly contact the Red Worm Queen. He could only observe through the faceless one shell from outside. After Saul expressed his dissatisfaction several times clearly, they finally brought out Alec's original words. Before the Stargate departed, Saul could not directly contact the Worm Queen. After Saul verbally expressed his dissatisfaction, he stopped looking for the Worm Queen and returned to research with Douglas on how to control deactivated red worms using soul bodies. Because of their experience with Stargate experiments, although they hadn't obtained core secrets, the two quickly found a method to make soul bodies merge into deactivated red worms. This soul body was naturally Agu. Since he couldn't see red worms, he had never known what red worms looked like. This was also the most difficult part of his merging into red worms. The problem was that whether one could see them or not was something that temporarily couldn't be changed. But fortunately, Douglas designed a radar-like magical array that allowed Agu to discover the red worm's location in another sense, enabling him to enter the worm's bodies and complete synchronization. After Agu's successful experiment, Saul and Douglas began summarizing their experience and attempting to use ordinary soul bodies to merge into deactivated red worms. They didn't need these ordinary soul bodies to independently control the red worms. They just needed them to be controllable by Agu. After Saul's experiment also entered a new phase, the Stargate finally came to Saul and Douglas for the final handover of their agreement. This also meant that Alec and the others were about to leave. This Star Observatory Tower will be left to other members of the Stargate, but the hidden world side can be given to you. Alec sat in his reclining chair, like a leisurely old man. Saul and Douglas were currently standing on the topmost floor of the Star Observatory Tower. The gravity here was specially designed to be parallel to the ground. That is, when standing normally, one faced the sky with their back to the earth. This seemed to be done to facilitate Alec's observation of the Stargate. That's really too kind of you to actually leave us a world side. After all, deactivated red worms are difficult to move, and that world side actually cannot provide a complete ecological cycle. It can only serve as a relatively large experimental site. Saul nodded. Alec was right. This world side located in high altitude was different from other world sides Saul had visited before. Other world sides were basically miniature worlds with complete ecosystems that could normally nurture life, even when completely isolated from the main world. But the Stargate's hidden world side didn't even have gravity. Although the air contained relatively abundant elemental particles, other materials were close to none. Everything inside had been moved in bit by the Stargate Council over the years, then manufactured bit by bit. Now the most valuable things inside were that spherical laboratory and the deactivated red worms filling the sky. Alec looked at the two men. As for how to divide the things inside, you can decide for yourselves. Douglas smiled. No problem. There's also the underground base. The things inside aren't very useful anymore, but I can only hand over the Worm Queen to you at the last moment before leaving. After all, we still need it before then. This time Saul didn't respond. Whether they needed it or not was just a matter of their word anyway. So when are you leaving? Douglas spread his hands. Can this be said? It can, Alec nodded readily, dawn on November 7th. Saul was startled. Wasn't that tonight? They really were conducting the handover at the last moment. Moreover, Alec had just told Saul and Douglas to divide the handover items themselves. Wasn't this trying to use benefit distribution that could easily cause disputes to distract the two men's attention? Looking at Alec's calm appearance, it was clear he didn't mind Saul and Douglas knowing these things. Thinking of this, Saul no longer wanted to stay here. Fine, then I wish you all a smooth journey. I'll head back first. Watching Saul leave impatiently, Alec asked Douglas, who hadn't yet stepped away. Saul should be going to the hidden world side. Don't you want to go see what you'd like? The corners of Douglas's mouth lifted slightly. What I want isn't here. Before Alec could frown in confusion, Douglas looked deeply at the image before him once more, then waved his hand. I'm very serious about eliminating the abyssal eye. Finally, I wish you a pleasant journey through the stars. Saying this, Douglas performed a chest-touching salute, then also turned and left the highest floor. In this room with abnormal gravity, only Alec remained alone. He lowered his eyes in contemplation. This Douglas isn't simple either. With him around, Saul will have plenty of headaches in the future. Whoosh! Murich's figure suddenly appeared in the room. It wasn't that Murich had learned teleportation. Like the current Alec, he was just an image projected by consciousness. Their real bodies had long been abandoned, their souls near the Stargate in the high sky, ready to depart at any moment. Council Chairman, all startup items are fully prepared. Should we depart now? Alec glanced at Murich. We're leaving, not fleeing. Murich quickly lowered his head and said nothing. Proceed according to the original plan. This is also the safe period we observed. Don't let your personal anxieties affect everyone's journey. As soon as Alec finished speaking, his figure suddenly disappeared from the room. Only then did Murich raise his head, looking toward the doorway where Saul had left, cold snorting in his heart. Yes, we're not fleeing. Saul, you humiliated me so much, but you still can't do anything about me, can you? HMPH, thinking that enduring it will get you the Worm Queen. Ha, I want you to feel suffocated and suppressed to forcibly endure, but in the end still get nothing. A triumphant smile appeared on his face. The low-latitude Escaper continent suddenly began to snow. Dark clouds covered the sky, and the moon and stars all hid away. The pitch-black night sky became even darker, as if announcing that the most powerful wizard organization that had once illuminated this continent would completely disappear starting tonight. Lunar calendar year 325, October 6th, 12:00 p.m. at night. Saul, lying in his bedroom, suddenly opened his eyes and sat up. It's time. He. A young girl's laughter rang out. The silver butterfly burst out from Saul's forehead, flying up and down around him, while black slender tentacles extended and split behind Saul's head, blooming into a huge black flower. Let's go send off our good friends from the Stargate. Chapter 987. Surprise or no surprise, expected or unexpected. The next second, he appeared within the Stargate. Not at the Stargate Council headquarters, but at that spatial fissure located in deep space, carefully hidden by the Council for their departure. The reason Saul could appear here was because, when he had wrapped Murich with tentacles and swung him up and down in the laboratory, he had grasped Murich's fate lines. From then on, Murich had become a coordinate point for Saul's teleportation. Only no one knew this except Saul. Now, when Saul sensed the coordinate point approaching the spatial fissure, he immediately teleported over. Before Saul, a chubby, fleshy worm was carefully preparing to cross the spatial fissure, leave the wizard world, and enter the vast starry sky to explore dangerous and unknown other worlds. That flesh worm was precisely the shell containing Murich's soul. The silver butterfly didn't need Saul's instructions and immediately rushed into the flesh-colored large worm before him. Murich's instinctive counterattack, born from shock and horror, suddenly froze rigid, and the action of stepping out of the Stargate could no longer be completed. The next instant, Saul's right hand had transformed into several semi-transparent octopus tentacles, firmly locking onto the worm, coiling around it several times, directly turning the worm into a ball of yarn. Just after completing this action, Saul immediately retreated. Almost simultaneously, a powerful mental force from outside the Stargate probed Saul's original position, and an arc of electricity suddenly flashed, nearly striking Saul. "Wizard Saul, what are you doing?" Alec's voice was transmitted into Saul's mind along with the mental force. Saul put his hands behind his back, quite having the shameless feeling of, even though you caught me, I just won't admit it. Council Chairman Alec, since the migration plan is a great success and you've already left the wizard world, this fellow Murich is useless. I want to communicate with him about Red Worm experience. He won't be participating in this migration journey. Heh, Alec laughed in extreme anger. You troubled Murich multiple times before just to numb me, making me think you only dared to vent verbally. I didn't expect you'd really dare to act against him. Do you think that just because I left the Stargate, I can't return? After Murich had toyed with Agu several times and used this to provoke Saul, Saul never intended to let Murich follow Alec in leaving the wizard world. For this, he deliberately acted petty and resentful, repeatedly finding insignificant troubles for Murich. The more such small troubles there were, the more it made them think Saul wouldn't really strike a killing blow against Murich. But they didn't know that Saul was waiting for the last day, at the moment when Murich thought he had succeeded and could smoothly follow Alec away, to decisively shatter his hope and completely seal off his future. Just like how Murich had deliberately killed Fiona in front of Agu, when Agu and Fiona had just recognized each other. Perhaps Murich, having failed to find other faceless ones, had already decided to dispose of the backup faceless one Fiona. But he specifically chose to do it in front of Agu, waiting until the person was grief-stricken before casually explaining in a few sentences. Moreover, Murich claimed that the one who killed the real Fiona was a half-elf, but he didn't expect this half-elf to be right beside Saul. This meant that Murich had definitely lied about the killer's identity. A lie with 9 truths and 1 falsehood is most believable. Since the half-elf wasn't the killer, then who was? Who else could know the ins and outs of an incident so clearly, know the death process of an ordinary 15-year-old girl so well? Naturally, only the real killer. Therefore, after hearing Agu's tearful account, Saul made his decision in an instant. To kill Murich. Now he had completed the first step. Let Murich's beautiful dream of stepping into a new world shatter at the moment closest to realization. Of course, the price was facing Alec's fury. Council Chairman Alec, I'm definitely keeping this Murich. It has nothing to do with whether you can return or not. Of course, I still suggest you preserve your strength and continue your interstellar journey. After all, who knows what kind of enemies you might encounter in the future? Better to conserve your strength properly. However, Alec had no intention of abandoning Murich. Perhaps Murich had once made great contributions, or had a close relationship with Alec. Perhaps it was that Alec couldn't tolerate Saul trampling on his dignity. Do you really think you're qualified to make me preserve my strength? Alec's mental force was already approaching the Stargate. He was really going to return from outside. Saul raised his hand and handed Murich over to little Algie's mouth. Seeing the half-meter-long flesh worm, little Algie directly went AWOO and swallowed the worm in one bite. The flesh worm didn't resist at all, because when Saul wrapped Murich with tentacles, He had already used the diary to directly collect his soul body into the diary's black pages. Even if Alec wanted to demand Murich back now, it was too late. Having completed the shell handover, Saul immediately spread his arms. He was already prepared. As long as Alec dared to return, he would show Alec what for. The kind of extremely dangerous look with eyes covering his entire body, eyes that liked to blink, with 7-colored pupils. However, just as Alec was about to enter the Stargate, suddenly another voice rang out behind Saul. "Since you chose to flee, don't come back, Alec. This world no longer welcomes you. Or rather, I don't welcome you." Hearing this familiar voice, the corners of Saul's mouth lifted, and he then retracted his arm tentacles, no longer activating the star-shaped eyes in his body. Conversely, Alec outside the Stargate stopped in his tracks due to this voice, no longer approaching. At the same time, his voice, surprised yet heavy, also rang in the minds of Saul and the person behind him. "Gorsa, you didn't die. Yeah, took a trip to stroll around the abyssal eye that you don't even dare to glance at, and now I'm back." Gorsa flew to Saul's side, his golden pupils slightly narrowing, not concealing the mockery in his eyes at all. Saul turned his head, about to greet his master. It had been over half a year since he last saw Gorsa, and he hadn't expected him to recover so quickly. However, when Saul turned to look at the current Gorsa, he immediately widened his eyes, the corners of his mouth twitching. The Gorsa before him was still wrapped in bandages all over his body, making it impossible to see what condition his body had recovered to. These bandages were the ones Saul had helped wrap when he rescued him. But Saul remembered clearly wrapping white bandages, so why were the bandages on Master Gorsa now pink? Before he could marvel at his master turning pink again, Saul heard Alec from the other side of the Stargate speak again. "Very good, it seems I underestimated you. Saul, I underestimated you too. You two madmen together might really have the ability to withstand the black tide, withstand the abyssal eye. He. I hope when I return after advancing to 5th rank, I can still see you. If you're still alive, we'll settle all old scores then." After saying this, Alec's mental force distanced itself again. It seemed that due to the dual pressure from Saul and Gorsa, he had abandoned Murich. Only then did Saul slowly retreat, yielding the Stargate's position, looking at the other flesh worms trembling nearby, making a polite please gesture. "I'm catching up with old times with Murich. Other wizards, please continue your journey. If you're too slow, you might not be able to keep up with Council Chairman Alec." Chapter 988, 5th target achieved. Yura is very fond of this color. The two left the Stargate and returned to the Star Observatory Tower. Saul rubbed his forehead. After learning that Lady Yura was actually a soul fragment that Master Gorsa had prepared for himself long ago, he could no longer look directly at this name. "Please don't pass the blame to Yura." "Blame Heth Cauldron." The two stood in the room where Alec had originally been. Gorsa raised his hand and lightly traced, and the entire room's gravity returned to normal. He had no intention of starring at the Stargate. "I thought you called me over because you wanted to kill Alec." Gorsa walked up and unceremoniously pulled over Alec's reclining chair, lying down on it. But as soon as he lay down, he found it uncomfortable. Black shadows swept over the chair, directly pulling it into the floor's shadow where it disappeared. Gorsa then took out his beloved giant pink sofa and collapsed onto it again. The huge, soft pink sofa was completely out of place with Alec's room decorations, but neither of the two people present cared about such things. Without destroying a 4th-rank wizard's foundation, you can't completely kill them, and just killing Alec once would be energy-consuming and not worth the gain. Saul was also unceremonious, taking out the pink sofa Gorsa had given him, though his sitting posture was somewhat more proper than Gorsa's. So dealing with a mere third rank and completely offending Alec was worth the loss. Great, just after advancing to fourth rank, third ranks had become mere third ranks. Saul rolled his eyes internally. Alec has more important matters to handle, and I'm not afraid of him either. Besides, didn't you arrive just in time? Actually, when Saul went back to deliver the Chaos Realm compass to Kelly, he had visited the recuperating Gorsa together with Kelly. At that time, Gorsa still looked like a puddle. But not long after Saul returned, he received a letter from Kelly saying that the puddle had mostly recovered. If Saul encountered any difficulties at the Stargate Council, he could immediately ask for help. When Saul learned that Alec was leaving tonight, he immediately found an opportunity to leave the Star Observatory Tower, then used the prismatic channel to have Shea notify Master Gorsa. The Master must have teleported all the way here to arrive in time at midnight, according to the coordinates Saul had left. Although the Stargate Council tried hard to hide the spatial fissure's location, Saul, who had attached fate lines to Murich, quickly determined the position. In any case, Alec had left, and Murich's soul had entered the diary. After Saul used the dead wizard's diary to excavate all of Murich's knowledge and secrets, he would naturally let him drift away with the wind. By the way, last time you mentioned a method that could establish a connection between us and enhance each other's strength. Master Gorsa suddenly brought up another matter, something Saul had mentioned before he risked going to the Abyssal Eye. Yes, Saul was startled, not expecting Master Gorsa to suddenly bring this up. Can this connection still be established now? Saul suddenly raised his head. Master Gorsa actually wanted to actively become his fifth target. The usually languid Gorsa slowly but firmly sat up straight from the sofa, placing his elbows on his knees with fingers interlaced. Alec has left. Before and after the Abyssal Eye completely erupts, he's unlikely to return. And old Norton, he won't be able to hold on much longer either. Saul, I will simultaneously take over the Stargate Council and the Glare family. Moreover, I can tell you right now that when facing the Black Tide, Escaper Continent will definitely not stand idly by as before. I will take the initiative to attack, even if it causes massive casualties. I need to enhance my strength as much as possible, and your power no longer belongs to that of a third-rank wizard. Except for not being able to resurrect at will, you're already stronger than Ophelia, and your advancement speed is a speed that even terrifies me. So, I hope to gain support from your power. In equal exchange, the entire Stargate Council will also fully support your research and battles. Gorsa had already witnessed the soul-fixed army designed by Kelly and Brando in the Chaos Realm. Although it was currently only a small-scale force, once the numbers increased, it would be a terrifying army. And this was just one aspect of the power Saul controlled. For so many years, he had focused solely on personal strength and knowledge improvement, neglecting the importance of collective combat power. But after returning from the Abyssal Eye, he understood that such an abyss absolutely couldn't be defeated by a single powerful fourth rank. Having understood the enemy's strength, Gorsa immediately changed his plans. He rapidly recovered his own power, directly absorbing back the Ura soul fragment he had cultivated for so long to ensure his mental power returned to peak condition. At the same time, this time when he came to Escaper, he would no longer fight alone. The entire continent's resources would become chess pieces in his hands. And simultaneously, he was also willing to become Saul's chess piece. You've dropped a bombshell on me right after returning. Saul's heart surged with excitement, and he couldn't help but stand up from the sofa. Honestly speaking, when it came to courting death, to repeatedly dancing on the edge of a blade, who could compare to Gorsa? Saul could almost see the fate lines jumping like an electrocardiogram above Gorsa. Of course it's possible, Master, Saul agreed almost without hesitation. He had initially considered Douglas, but the latter's purposes were unclear and difficult to control, so Saul had never made a decision. But for Master Gorsa to actively propose becoming the fifth target and forming an offensive-defensive alliance with Saul, he naturally wouldn't refuse. After all, Gorsa was now the only official fourth-rank wizard remaining in Iskaper, and he would soon take over two top-tier wizard organizations, the Glare family and Stargate Council. Saul would definitely gain a massive amount of destiny power again. His strength, as well as the strength of all Symphony of Fate targets, would receive a qualitative improvement. That night, 5 dazzling red lights suddenly burst from the topmost floating layer of the Star Observatory Tower. Then the red lights drilled back into the building's interior. Because of the extremely high location, almost no one discovered the changes here. Only a few people silently noticed this fleeting firework in the deepest darkness before dawn. The fifth target of the Symphony of Fate was finally achieved. In the darkness, Kismet sat on the roof of a 3-story building, sporadically playing the silver harp in his hands. When the red light pillars appeared, he suddenly looked up, but only saw thick cloud layers. After being stunned for just a moment, Kismet again expressionlessly lowered his head, plucking out the next clear, pleasant string sound. Below Kismet's feet, several low-rank wizards were mechanically moving about in the room. These people seemed to have lost consciousness, becoming marionettes, drawing complex and mysterious magical arrays on the ground. Each time they completed a set of complete composite rune groups, they would remove an organ from their chest cavity and place it on the array, until they could no longer persist and became empty shell corpses. Then another person would appear, drag away the corpse, and continue the array-drawing work. A figure suddenly appeared behind Kismet. Your progress is much slower than Ophelia's. Douglas walked to the edge of the eaves, standing with his hands behind his back. What's the rush? Whether it's sooner or later, we'll all reach the ending anyway. Chapter 989, Contaminating the Worm Queen. Douglas considered himself very understanding of Kismet. Are you complaining to me about not returning to you all this time? Yes, Kismet said lazily. Don't worry, after completing my goal, I'll make you whole again. Kismet's fingers stopped, and the puppets downstairs also ceased their movements shortly after the music stopped. Then please rest assured, I will definitely complete all the storm eyes before the day you need to achieve your goal. Facing Kismet's discontented complaints, Douglas just smiled and shook his head, but didn't actually urge Kismet. What consequences would arise from failing to complete the tasks he assigned? Kismet, being a clever person, understood very clearly. He no longer concerned himself with Kismet, instead thinking about what would happen after today. Those who should leave have left. Those who want to survive are probably unable to hold back much longer. No rush, no rush. I'll send you a big feast right away. In the underground base, Corey stood by the pool imprisoning the Red Worm Queen, staring blankly in a daze. She was one of the few who guessed that she wouldn't be taken away by Council Chairman Alec. Guessing was one thing, but she couldn't publicize it. Otherwise, high-rank wizards had plenty of ways to make sure you could never speak again. So each successful practical experiment meant getting closer to the day when those high-rank wizards would leave. Tonight Corey felt particularly restless, so she returned to the Worm Queen's location. Because mental power couldn't be dispersed here, it actually made people feel peaceful at heart. But after less than a few minutes of calm, Corey suddenly sensed someone approaching the warehouse. She immediately turned around and picked up a control panel from the nearby experimental table. Since mental power couldn't be used here, many magical tools had been prepared for protection. Wizard Corey, what's wrong? Naturally, Corey couldn't be the only person in such an important warehouse. As soon as she moved, Other wizards immediately inquired about the situation. Someone seems to have entered, but there's been no message from above. Upon hearing this, the others immediately sprang into action. The Worm Queen was an important resource, and even though they didn't think anyone would dare offend the Stargate Council's interests, they couldn't let their guard down. Wizard Corey. Before long, a somewhat unfamiliar wizard opened the stairs and walked down. The other party even had the secret key to enter underground, so they should be someone sent by the council. It's just that Corey hadn't seen them much before. Wizard Corey, hello. The newcomer was a quite pretty witch with brown curly hair lazily hanging down to her calves. I'm Madeline. Master Murich sent me to check on the Worm Queen's condition. Red Worm Queens preferred the aura of witches, so the wizards who went underwater to soothe the Worm Queen were generally witches. People like Saul could also go underwater to approach the Red Worm Queen, but frequent contact would make the Worm Queen irritable. Usually it's another wizard who comes. Tilda, she's been quite busy lately. I have an introduction letter from Wizard Murich here. Madeline drew out a piece of paper folded 4 times from her chest, flicking her finger to toss it toward Corey. Corey raised her hand to catch the note, maintaining proper vigilance, grasping one corner of the paper and gently shaking it to unfold the entire letter. She quickly scanned the content, focusing on the compound magical runes and miniature magical arrays at the end. No problems, it's Wizard Murich's personal letter. Corey handed the letter to a nearby wizard apprentice for filing, then stepped forward to welcome Madeline. Sorry, we didn't receive advance notice, so we verified it several times. Madeline smiled warmly, completely unbothered. No problem, the council's interests come first. I don't mind waiting. Corey led Madeline toward the pool water. Do you need to go underwater for observation? Yes, don't worry, I know all the rules. I absolutely won't use mental power for observation. Although this was Madeline's first time coming, she was obviously very familiar with the procedures. She walked to the pool's edge, removed her outermost wizard robe, revealing a somewhat sexy fitted short shirt and long pants underneath. Then she lightly leaped and dove into the murky pool water. Corey watched from the side, not asking what Madeline wanted to observe. After all, aside from maintaining the Worm Queen's stability, Corey wasn't qualified to know about other important experiments. After all, she was a wizard affiliated with the Glare family. Underwater, Madeline opened her eyes, looking at the giant egg before her, the corners of her mouth slightly lifting, but suddenly a small syringe appeared in her hand. The syringe contained a small amount of black liquid that swayed slightly with Madeline's movements. Inject today, and there'll be a reaction in 10 days. HMPH, by then we'll have already left the Stargate, so let them deal with the crazed Worm Queen. The Red Worm Queen was neither a material body nor a mental body, making it difficult for ordinary potions to affect it. But the Stargate Council had captured the Worm Queen for so many years and studied it for so long. Naturally, they had some methods of their own. The potion in Madeline's hand wasn't ordinary liquid either. The liquid was just the surface carrier for transmission. Inside was a trace of shocked, fearful, malicious thoughts. Just this trace of malicious thoughts, if released in a city of ordinary people, would be enough to directly drive an entire city mad, turning them into thoughtless, irrational killers. Whether brothers and sisters, parents and children, beloved friends and family, they could all bite each other's throats without hesitation. As long as she injected this trace of malicious thoughts into the Worm Queen's eggshell interior, the Worm Queen would gradually go mad under the influence of the malicious thoughts. It would forget its primary duty of laying eggs and only think about killing all living creatures before it. And this was a little lesson for those who didn't respect the Stargate Council. The syringe gradually approached the giant egg, the sharp needle piercing into the eggshell's interior, just as Madeline was about to push the potion. Suddenly, time seemed to freeze. Madeline felt her heartbeat suddenly stop, and the water ripples around her no longer undulated. She looked down at her hands, wanting to think, but her brain provided no feedback. It seemed like a second had passed, or perhaps a very long time, before Madeline finally regained her perception of time. What just happened? She was somewhat bewildered, fear of the unknown beginning to well up in her heart. She suddenly discovered that her hand had somehow changed position. The syringe that had originally pierced the giant egg had moved with her hand to her neck area, with the needle tip already piercing her throat. What? The confused Madeline didn't have time to feel surprised before her fingers followed their original inertia and pushed the syringe. Hiss! Madeline's eyes instantly turned red, and her expression became ferocious. I've been infected by malicious thoughts. I need to quickly leave and use mental stabilization techniques outside. Mental power couldn't be used in the White Warehouse, which was also why Murich chose to use malicious thoughts to destroy the Worm Queen. But now Madeline had injected this trace of malicious thoughts into her own body. If she wanted to quickly resolve these malicious thoughts, she had to go outside the warehouse. The plan had failed for unknown reasons. She was very frustrated, not knowing how to face Murich later. But fortunately, this potion had deliberately controlled the dosage. It would take 10 days to completely affect the Worm Queen, but only 1 hour to affect Madeline. That much time was enough for Madeline to run outside the warehouse, and she could even make it back to the Star Observatory Tower. However, just as she was about to swim to the surface, she suddenly felt as if a mouth had grown inside her brain. That mouth had pitch-black teeth and a crimson tongue. The uvula at the deepest part of the oral cavity continuously trembled under the impact of air. I want to eat you. I want to eat everything before me. As this furious thought arose, Madeline's originally bloodshot eyes instantly became pitch black, as if ink had been dropped into them. I want to eat you. I want to eat everything before me. Madeline used all her strength to open her mouth, the corners instantly tearing. However, just as she was about to jump out of the pool, another scene suddenly appeared before her eyes. It was an arched door, inside which was a constantly changing multicolored world. The world seemed to contain eerie figures, but those figures were all entangled together, as if glued into a mass by some adhesive, unable to separate. Just as Madeline was temporarily suppressing her rage due to the strange scene before her, those figures stuck together suddenly approached the arched door, extending colorful fingers to grab at the bewildered Madeline. A few seconds later, Madeline's corpse floated to the surface. Corey, who had been standing by the pool observing underwater with her naked eyes, immediately changed expression. Someone come, Wizard Madeline is dead, quickly notify the council. Chapter 990, New Chairman, New Experiments. The wizards here had originally thought that, with the successful migration experiment, they could follow Council Chairman Alec and leave this world without a future. But they hadn't expected that Council Chairman Alec, just as the fourth practical experiment succeeded, would choose without delay to take all third-rank wizards and leave. Meanwhile, the other low-rank wizards and apprentices who had assisted with the experiments were left behind. Not a single one was taken. These people had never been clear about the core content of the experiments from beginning to end, only learning about experimental progress at intervals. When the second practical experiment achieved great success, these people were overjoyed. When the third practical experiment also proceeded smoothly, they began to anticipate a bright future after entering the Stargate. When the fourth practical experiment achieved all established targets, they had already begun to pity the wizards of the other two continents. But this proud and excited mood hadn't lasted even a few days before being completely shattered. It turned out they had never been on Alec's migration list from start to finish. It turned out they were in exactly the same position as those people they had pitied. After emotions of shock, disbelief, daze, and disappointment, enormous anger erupted. All the instruments, documents, and even doors and windows inside the Star Observatory Tower were smashed to pieces. Fortunately, everyone was a rational wizard, otherwise even greater chaos might have ensued. It wasn't until noon, when everyone had vented enough, that emotions finally settled down again. People began wanting to leave the Stargate Council, though after leaving the Stargate Council, they didn't know where to go. Just as everyone was at a loss and preparing to leave the Star Observatory Tower, the tower's external door suddenly slammed shut with a bang. The wizard closest to the door was startled and hurriedly stepped forward to try pushing the door open, but the door wouldn't budge. Just as that wizard was preparing to use magic to blast open the door, the sound of grinding stone suddenly came from overhead. Everyone on the first floor quickly looked up, each preparing for battle. Then they saw the floor between the first and second floors bloom open like a flower in a spiral. Then between the second and third floors, between the third and fourth floors. The entire interior of the Star Observatory Tower opened up through the middle, all the way to the topmost floor. An extremely powerful oppressive force pressed down from above. The already bright interior of the Star Observatory Tower became even more dazzling. Meanwhile, the shadows at everyone's feet suddenly came to life, dancing on the floor and walls. This is a fourth-rank wizard's mental power. Several second-rank wizards were first to recognize what tier this oppressive force represented. News that a fourth-rank wizard had appeared inside the Star Observatory Tower spread like ripples in all directions. Soon, the wizards who had just been angry and resentful all quieted down one by one. Council Chairman Alec had left, taking away a large number of third-rank wizards, leaving only them, this group of low-rank wizards, to face the unknown apocalypse. But now the Stargate Council had another fourth-rank wizard appearing. Might there be a turning point? Most people held this thought, suppressing their natural fear of high-rank wizards and waiting in place. At this time, on the highest floor of the Star Observatory Tower, a wizard wearing a black wizard robe, showing only half a pink chin, appeared above. As soon as he appeared, everyone realized he was that new fourth-rank wizard. Although his face wasn't visible, someone quickly recognized his identity through mental power fluctuations. Lord Gorsa. Corey covered her mouth, crying out in disbelief. She had originally come to report that Madeline had died in the underground base, but hadn't expected to hear upon arrival that Council Chairman Alec had already left this world. Although she had anticipated this, she hadn't expected the chairman's actions to be so swift. As soon as he had confidence, he immediately left the wizard world, as if enemies were already chasing at his heels. But what made Corey incredibly delighted was that she actually encountered the legendary Gorsa here, who was rumored to have died at the Abyssal Eye. More and more people recognized Gorsa, though they weren't familiar with him. Under the gaze of all the wizards, Gorsa finally spoke. "It seems you've destroyed most of the migration plan materials. Although you weren't left behind voluntarily at this point, you can only accept your fate." Gorsa's words still caused a small disturbance, but those who had just wanted to make small moves suddenly found they couldn't move, as if bound by something. If they could look down, they would discover that the culprit binding them immobile was their own shadows. "I declare that from now on, I am the new chairman of the Stargate Council, and all Stargate Council experimental projects are suspended. Research direction changes to combating the Black Tide. Those who can't do it, just obediently go die." Outside the Star Observatory Tower, Saul stood in the high sky observing the scene of the Stargate Council changing hands, with Byron also standing beside him. I didn't expect Lord Gorsa would ultimately choose to take over the Stargate Council. Saul nodded. This is equivalent to taking on the responsibility of guarding Escaper Continent. Time and experience really can change a person to an extreme degree. Changed? I still think my master hasn't changed at all. Back at the Wizard Tower, Master strictly stipulated that all first-rank wizards could only research his resurrection magic, not allowing too much energy to be spent on other matters. It was precisely because of Master Gorsa's domineering behavior back then that over half the mentors participated in the rebellion. Now it seemed Master Gorsa was resolutely unchanging. Our experiments also need to accelerate. Saul turned around, no longer watching the Stargate's excitement. After all, 1/4 rank suppressing a group of 2nd rank and below wasn't that effortless. Senior, you said the half-elf suddenly left you last night. Yes, he said there was a problem with the Worm Queen that needed handling. Is your connection with the elves still there? Yes. Tusk. Saul clicked his tongue. It seemed that even with the half-elf leaving Byron, he couldn't sever his connection with the elves. The source problem really needed to be resolved. No rush, Byron instead comforted Saul. The two returned to the villa in Alga's royal capital. Saul took out the diary, turning to the page where Murich was located. Was the person sent to the Worm Queen's side dispatched by you? Yes, what is this place? Why can it control my consciousness? Murich first answered Saul's question, then posed the familiar inquiry. Saul glanced at Byron. Fortunately, they had left a backup plan. Otherwise, if the Worm Queen they had obtained flew away, Murich could truly discuss them to death. What did you want to do? Saul continued asking. Use malicious thoughts to affect the Worm Queen's state, making it completely go berserk and stop laying eggs. That way, even if you got the Worm Queen, it would be useless. You captured me. The chairman won't let you go. He left. Did you leave any other contingencies? No more. We left in a hurry. No time to arrange too much. What about the others, including Alec? Did they leave other contingencies? Or those resources and wealth you couldn't take, where are they all? How can they be obtained? Murich was struggling. The chairman did leave behind. He persisted for 1 second. Chapter 991, Saul 4th rank. Many of these things were not useful to him, but the Stargate Council would definitely need them. Saul planned to have the Stargate people collect those resources and wealth, then pick out what was useful to him later. If the apocalypse weren't approaching, no one would say anything if he monopolized these resources. But now Saul hoped more to use these things in more useful places, strengthening their ability to resist the Abyssal Eye. Otherwise, if the Abyssal Eye fully erupted and the entire world was destroyed, the resources Saul occupied would become waste. What value would they have then? After Byron left, Saul sat alone in the room. Now several consciousness bodies had been sent out by him, leaving only Penny and little Algie by his side. Penny, you're responsible for patrolling the room, especially watching the movements across the way. The silver butterfly immediately rushed out, circling once in front of Saul. Received, Brother Saul. Little Algie, maintain full house surveillance. Whing. Black slender tentacles emerged from Saul's nape, suddenly expanding and thickening, instantly changing from finger thickness to half-meter thickness. This main stem continuously split and grew, spreading outward from Saul as the center. Soon the entire room was filled with black tentacles, like ivy crawling outside a house. Actually, there's no need to be so tense. Saul smiled and slowly closed his eyes. His consciousness roamed within his body, passing through every inch of skin, crossing every bone. his gaze sweeping over meridians and organs, then winding through every groove of his brain. "I remember." Saul didn't open his mouth, but his voice transmitted from his skin pores. The next second, Saul suddenly disappeared. The clothes originally worn on his body collapsed to the ground. Nightmare Butterfly and Little Algae couldn't understand what happened, but they both obediently stayed in place, not daring to breathe heavily. Where did Saul go? He was of course still here, even still in this room, but his bodily form had undergone a complete transformation. After completing the 5 targets of the Symphony of Fate, he could advance at any time, but he had been suppressing it, not taking that final step. Now, confirming that the situation was temporarily stable, the first thing Saul did upon returning to his residence was take that step. Silent and soundless, yet a complete change in level regarding life. From an angle no one could see, a mass of twisted and intertwined threads was suspended in the middle of the room. This mass of threads was slowly expanding, slowly stretching and recurling. Like an infant struggling to flex its fingers, trying to recognize this world. Saul, transformed into Fate line form, quickly filled the entire room. The threads easily passed through walls and soil without any obstruction, directly penetrating through. This was the same as red worms, but in this state Saul could only observe. He couldn't attack people like red worms could. If I can't attack at all, then where did the Death Demon nickname for those fate lines in the prismatic world come from? Saul circled around and found that the living things nearby really were only little Algae and Penny left. He couldn't very well use these 2 little ones for experiments. Since he temporarily couldn't try attacking, Saul slowly calmed his mind, sensing the changes around him. Around this mass of threads that was him, 5 red channels appeared. These 5 channels were normally completely invisible. Saul could only vaguely sense his connection with the other 5 fate targets. Today he saw the specific appearance of these connections for the first time. Now each connection channel was filled with destiny force, like blood rapidly flowing through arteries, delivering life's nutrients to each of them. Shea, Floco, Mido, the Sighing Wall, and Gorsa. The destiny power fed back from them was almost constantly pushing Saul's development upward. Now, if Saul wanted, he could even expand his fate lines to cover an area as large as the entire Olga Duchy. Moreover, as Saul became more accustomed to his current form, he believed his radiation range would continue to expand. Someday, it could cover the entire wizard world. It's just that with the threat of the Abyssal Eye approaching, this world might not leave Saul so much time to continue growing. Next, it's time to focus on solving the Black Tide apocalypse. The clothes on the ground floated back into the air, like a reversed video, returning to human form. Then Saul's figure reappeared. He looked down at his hands, clenching his palms. He seemed to still look the same, but was actually vastly different from before. The current Saul was only part of his original body. The real him was actually hidden at the center where the Symphony of Fate converged. This way, even if this current body was crushed to powder by someone, Saul could always extract a small amount of limbs from the Symphony of Fate to become a new Saul. Moreover, his original body continued to grow and metabolize under the nourishment of fate power, completely unafraid of consumption. This was the power of a 4th-rank wizard. Developing one's own power to the limit, completely transcending ordinary concepts of life and death. As a bonus, Saul also gained a space belonging exclusively to himself. Now he no longer needed any spatial storage equipment. He just needed to place items at the center of the Symphony of Fate, next to his original body. Even the anchor point originally stored at his left fingertip could be stored there, quietly and peacefully, showing no signs of wanting to contaminate nearby objects. It was completely suppressed by Saul's fate line form. Brother Saul Have you completely entered fourth rank? Penny flew over again. But this time it didn't dare rest on Saul's head, always feeling that the Saul before it seemed real yet illusory, as if standing right there, yet not there at all. Little Algie had also completely lost connection with him when Saul disappeared just now, and was currently coiled on the ground with its little mouth open in confusion. Yes, finally, completely entered fourth rank. Saul raised both arms, his 10 fingers flickering in and out of existence. Penny was extremely joyful. Haha, from now on I'm the sidekick of the world's most powerful fourth-rank wizard. I can walk sideways across the continent. Though Penny's words were exaggerated, they might well be fact. Having completed his transformation, Saul lifted his hand to pull little Algie back to his shoulder. You can continue hiding in my body from now on. Unless absolutely necessary, I won't easily completely transform my form. Little Algie was very happy, whoosh, diving back into Saul's nape. Although its foundation was at the Purity Wizard Tower, it had long considered Saul as its other nest. After settling little Algie and cleaning up the slight traces left when he transformed into Fate Lines, Saul snapped his fingers. A set of black robes instantly appeared on him, much more convenient than taking it out from spatial tools. Let's go, we'll check on Byron and the half-elf's progress. If everything goes smoothly, we'll have the half-elf start laying eggs non-stop from today. Haha, great. Hearing Saul speak of the half-elf this way, Penny was unusually happy. Let's go, time to act tyrannically. Chapter 992. The Worm Queen emerges. Now every major force in the wizard world had close ties with Saul. He had to carefully nurture them. With a flash, Saul was already standing behind Byron. In front of Byron was a massive monster. At first glance, Saul couldn't even connect it with red worms. The monster before him was grayish, with a huge oval-shaped skull. The skull had no eyes but dozens of fleshy tentacles. Below the skull grew 4 thick legs. Between the 4 legs hung a tumor-like growth, connected to the skull by only a bit of skin, looking as though it might break off at any moment. This is the Worm Queen. It doesn't look anything like red worms at all. Penny flew a circle around the Worm Queen. It seems to have a physical form. The silver butterfly landed on the Worm Queen's bald skull and actually managed to stand firmly. The Red Worm Queen was the first to notice Saul's arrival, dozens of tentacles turning toward him, seemingly sensing Saul's presence. For some reason, Saul felt the Worm Queen before him had a kind of delicate, refined beauty. The monster before him was quite ugly, but after looking at it for a while, he found it somewhat attractive. Seeing the unhidden nightmare butterfly, Byron knew Saul had arrived. This is the Worm Queen. The giant egg we saw before was how it looked when imprisoned. Just now, when the half-elf confirmed control over the Worm Queen, we stripped away the shell and released it. Corey was also standing beside Byron. Originally, she wanted to come greet Saul when she saw him, but froze in place upon clearly seeing Saul's face. The Saul before her seemed different from before. Corey had a guess in her heart, but didn't dare continue thinking about it. Saul first nodded to Corey, then walked to the Worm Queen's front, slowly raising his hand to place it on its head. Although the giant egg imprisoning the Worm Queen was very large, the Worm Queen inside was actually only the height of an adult. Its skin felt very fragile to the touch, with almost no tactile feedback. It made Saul feel like he was touching a water surface. With just a little force, his finger could press beneath the surface. Saul withdrew his hand and extended his mental power to probe. Under his mental examination, only the thin outer layer of skin on the Worm Queen was real. Inside was complete emptiness. However, this emptiness was mixed with some elven aura. Half-elf, how is your current state? The Worm Queen's tentacles drooped down, pointing at Saul's face. At the tip of each tentacle, a beautiful face appeared. I've basically gained control of the Worm Queen's body and consciousness, but to use it flexibly and control other red worms as you mentioned will still take time. Byron listened expressionlessly from the side, while Corey couldn't help but glance at Saul several times. If she didn't also have a natural poker face, her eyeballs would probably have fallen out by now. Even the legendary Gorsa, rumored to have died at the Abyssal Eye, suddenly appearing and forcibly succeeding as Stargate Council chairman hadn't shocked Corey this much. It's just that, although she had been temporarily called back to the underground base, she had changed from being a primary person in charge to an observer, so naturally wouldn't speak casually. Saul paid no attention to others' thoughts and continued asking the half-elf, "How much time do you need?" 3 to 5 years. Too long, that won't work. You must completely control this body within 1 year. I can't guarantee that right now. What methods could speed this up? The Worm Queen's own consciousness is extremely powerful. If I weren't constantly connected to the Elven collective consciousness in the world barrier, I'd probably be ejected the next second. To deal with such intense resistance and gradually tame it will take several years. Saul pondered for a moment, taming consciousness. Let me give you something, see if it can help. Saul raised his hand, and his palm suddenly split open, revealing an eye beneath the flesh. That eye had a colorful pupil, with colors constantly flowing like clouds in the sky. What is this? All the Worm Queen's tentacles focused on the eye. The next second, each tentacle sprouted an eye with a 7-colored pupil. Thud. Thud. Byron and Corey, who had also curiously looked over, actually fainted at the same time, with almost no resistance at all. But as a fourth rank, when Saul faced the star-shaped eyes again, he wasn't as confused as before. He watched the rigid half-elf and slowly closed his eyes. Soon, with his eyes closed, dozens of slightly different visual perspectives appeared in Saul's mind. In all these viewpoints, Saul's face appeared. Some viewpoints with special angles also showed the fainted Byron and Corey at the edges. However, Saul didn't give the Worm Queen star-shaped eyes to activate its vision attribute. Under Saul's control, the star-shaped eyes quickly flipped over, leaving only the whites facing outward. Then these eyes squeezed and squeezed, moving from the tentacle tips into the Worm Queen's gray skin, into that empty interior. But what was emptiness for matter and soul bodies was no different from solid substance to the star-shaped eyes. Wherever their gaze reached, faint red gradually appeared in places that had been empty. These red spots weren't connected to each other, but were separated by certain distances, then maintained a loose whole through mutual interaction forces. So this is why magic power and mental power can't detect red worms. But why can the eyes see them? The death demon said the power of fate lines isn't prophecy, but observation. Does this mean I should naturally be able to see these things? The Stargate Council's method of screening wizards was requiring the ability to see red worms. But those people's way of seeing red worms was probably quite different from Saul's. And the observation of fate lines seemed to naturally carry dangerous oppression from hierarchical differences, causing this observation to be accompanied by some kind of passive attack. Ordinary people, even low-rank wizards, might die directly under such observation. If Saul, the master, weren't deliberately suppressing the negative effects of the stars, probably half the people in Rhine City would go mad right now. The other half would be killed by the maddened ones. And now, the Worm Queen's consciousness under the star-shaped eye's gaze was obviously weakened. Then the half-elf exclaimed in delight, "How did you do that? The Worm Queen's resistance has weakened considerably." Probably, it's about who has a stronger presence. Saul's consciousness had already withdrawn from the Worm Queen's body. When he opened his eyes again, there were no traces of star-shaped eyes on the Worm Queen's tentacles. The half-elf was obviously very interested. How many more of these colorful eyes can you obtain? Many, but if I give you too many, I'm afraid I can't control their destructive power. I understand. I'll take advantage of this opportunity to take control over the Worm Queen as quickly as possible. Saul also warned him, the Worm Queen will also consume the eye's power. You must use them carefully, don't let the two clash directly. Otherwise, the Worm Queen will also be injured. If the eyes disappear, you can come find me again. The Worm Queen's tentacles kept spinning in circles towards Saul, looking like it was thinking. Probably thinking about where Saul got these eyes from. Chapter 993, I'm testing you. Now the Stargate Council was basically Saul's allied force, so using their facilities required no worry about conflicts of interest. Moreover, the underground base was fully equipped, and the personnel were familiar with the Worm Queen. It was a ready-made research facility that would be wasted if not used. Because of the half-elf, Byron would also likely be stationed at the underground base permanently, so the house they had originally rented was given to Saul. Using teleportation to leave the underground base again, Saul appeared beside Gorsa. At this time, Gorsa was leaning against his pink sofa, listening to several second-rank wizards temporarily selected by the Star Observatory Tower report on matters. Since they were facing Gorsa, when Saul instantly appeared on Gorsa's right side, the reporting wizards immediately saw him. "Ah, wizard Saul, you." But halfway through their greeting, they suddenly realized that Saul's aura was completely different from before. Standing beside Gorsa, the mental pressure emanating from both of them was equally powerful. The wizards below immediately fell silent. Gorsa turned his head to look at Saul. "Your teleportation ability is quite interesting." The Star Observatory Tower itself had magical arrays for defense, as well as countermeasures against spatial magic. Especially the council chamber where Gorsa was currently located had several additional isolation arrays. Otherwise, if enemies could easily teleport in and infiltrate their headquarters, it would cause massive damage. But Saul had still entered with just a simple teleportation, without even triggering the Star Observatory Tower's defense systems. "I've seen your teleportation ability before. It seems even more powerful after your advancement. I didn't even detect spatial fluctuations." Saul nodded, strong mobility but many limitations too. Gorsa didn't ask what the limitations were. Who doesn't have those? Fourth-rank wizards have only developed themselves to the limit, but control over the external world is still limited. He waved his hand at the wizards below, directly teleporting them out. This was showing off his teleportation ability to Saul, who had just become a fourth-rank wizard. Saul also paid attention to Gorsa's magic power and mental force changes, discovering that when Gorsa cast teleportation magic on others, there was more commotion, allowing Saul to observe more. Is a transfer using shadows? Saul discovered that these people were first transferred into their own shadows, then disappeared along with the shadows. If his master's teleportation also had limitations, it might be that there must be shadows, and shadows that had already been controlled by him. This would explain why when Master Gorsa came to pick up Saul before, he teleported in segments. At that time, he not only needed to teleport within shadows under his control, but the teleportation distance was also limited. It's just that as his strength increased, this distance became longer and longer, making it easy to overlook the changes. "How are things with the Worm Queen?" Gorsa asked. "Everything is going smoothly so far. The half-elf has already suppressed the Worm Queen's consciousness, but to completely control it still requires time. I've asked him to complete it within 1 year." "Within 1 year," Gorsa slightly widened his eyes. "My estimate should be that there are still 20 years left. Do you mean the Abyssal Eye will completely erupt within a few years?" Saul sighed lightly. Yes, I have methods to learn that there may only be a few years left before the abyss completely erupts. It's just that I haven't been able to calculate the exact number of years in detail. Gorsa was silent for a moment. This news was quite terrible for him too. Only a few years left. It seems our methods need to be even more forceful. He suddenly stood up from the sofa. I'll pull out all the Glare clan members hiding in the world's side to add some high-rank wizard personnel. I'll also utilize the soul-fixing magical arrays you left behind last time. Gorsa raised his hand, and a huge three-dimensional map immediately appeared before them. Saul immediately walked to the map, looking at several places his mentor had marked. I looked around and found that because Escaper Continent doesn't often face the black tide directly, the defenses against pollution here are quite lax. Didn't you set up many soul-fixing magical arrays in the borderland? I also plan to move them over and set them up in these coastal areas. Saul looked at one location, exactly the corner of the continent he had seen being sucked into the abyssal eye first in his dream, so he pointed there and said, "Add a few more soul-fixing arrays around here." This is the place on Escaper closest to the abyssal eye. Gorsa immediately understood Saul's intention. Are you worried this place will be attacked by the black tide? It's also to make defensive arrangements for the future. If someday Escaper Continent needs to directly face the abyssal eye, this will be the first line of defense. It's also where we'll lead the red worms to attack the abyssal eye. This was even more severe than Gorsa had originally speculated. There was no helping it, who told Saul to have prophetic dreams. Although the wizard world also had prophetic magic, both accuracy and clarity were touching. Wizards who preferred rational analysis didn't rely much on prophetic magic. However, Gorsa trusted Saul completely. Now, aside from Saul's several consciousness bodies, only Gorsa should understand Saul's special nature the most. Gorsa still held a fragment of Saul's soul. Good, I'll add personnel to these places. Watching Gorsa's composed manner, although knowing he could definitely control all the remaining personnel of the Stargate Council, the speed still exceeded Saul's imagination. The Stargate Council has no problems now. They've personally shattered their own hopes of leaving the wizard world. Now, they can naturally only change their thinking and resist the black tide. A group of people who had fantasized about escaping, upon discovering they couldn't run, could naturally only fight with their backs to the wall. Gorsa's timing was also perfect, and he quickly rallied their hearts. Then I'll return to the borderland first. I'll leave things here to you. After thinking it over, Saul reminded Gorsa once more, "There's a wizard Douglas who researched red worms together with us. He appears to be a third-rank wizard on the surface, but he might not be that simple. You should also be careful when dealing with him." Upon hearing this name, Gorsa's eyes flashed slightly and he nodded. Cooperation is cooperation, but vigilance can't be lacking, right? Saul nodded. It's best not to let him see that we're being vigilant against him, Gorsa continued. Saul could only continue nodding. The Stargate Council is really lacking high-rank wizards now, so I'll formally test him. If he passes, he can enter the Stargate Council's core management. What do you think? Whatever you say goes. Saul silently wiped away non-existent cold sweat. Master Gorsa was using the excuse of testing people to openly be vigilant against Douglas, and even if Douglas saw through it, as long as he remained third rank, he couldn't say anything. All right then. When it came to scheming against people, Saul didn't need to worry about Master Gorsa. Chapter 994, Climate Anomalies. As soon as he looked up, he saw Kismet idling around at the port. I've noticed that every time I come to the port I run into you. Are you following me? Kismet sat on the ship's rail holding his small harp, looking down at Saul with a smile. You're a fourth-rank wizard now. How could I possibly follow you? So does a fourth-rank wizard spend all day idle, playing the harp at the port? I'm just free during the day, but I'm very busy at night. Kismet pouted. Playing here is more relaxing than meditation for me. People came and went above the port, but not a single person paid attention to Saul and Kismet's presence. They were like projections from outside the world, unaffected by the people of this realm. Saul silently landed on the airship where Kismet was located. This airship happened to be heading to the city where the ultra-long-distance teleportation array was located. The airship doesn't leave its post at night either, so you're waiting here for me to depart. Saul sat on the ship's rail like Kismet. Are you following me back to Stat Continent this time too? I already said I just came here to clear my mind. I'm very busy now. Saul crossed his arms. Do you still need to create new pages now? The other was startled, then smiled somewhat sheepishly. How could that be? Now the diary belongs completely to you, creating pages should be your task. Then what are you busy with? Busy with? Revenge, hahaha, just kidding. Of course I'm continuing to improve myself. With the apocalypse approaching, if I don't think of something, I'll probably die under the towering waves of the black tide. Don't cause trouble for Master Gorsa and the others, Saul warned him. Actually, he felt that when Kismet said, just kidding, that was the part that was actually a joke. Don't worry, I won't sabotage their experiments. I also very much hope the Stargate Council can research methods to resist the Abyssal Eye. That would benefit me too. Although what Kismet said made perfect sense, his grinning appearance always made it feel like there were traps hidden in his words. The airship began to vibrate, about to take off. Kismet smiled and waved at Saul. Goodbye, my little master brother. After saying this, without waiting for Saul to say anything more, he leaned backward directly, flipping down from the ship's rail in free fall, then transformed into falling leaves in midair and disappeared. A pedestrian below the airship was suddenly showered with leaves. He instinctively reached out to catch them, only grasping some broken leaf fragments. When he looked up again, there were only blue skies, white clouds, and the massive airship slowly ascending. Who's playing pranks? He grumbled in dissatisfaction, but knowing he couldn't find the culprit, could only brush off the leaves and continue forward with his luggage. Saul withdrew his gaze. Kismet's figure had disappeared, but his fate lines were still jumping around in front of Saul. Do you think Kismet and Douglas have any relationship? The autumn wind whistled, but no one answered Saul's question. Yes. Saul spent some time and finally returned to the borderland again. Kelly and Brando, having learned of Saul's return time, had been waiting for him at the Purity Wizard Tower early. Are you leaving again after coming back this time? Kelly asked immediately upon meeting him. Saul thought for a moment. My next departure should be in a year. Now the half-elf still couldn't control the red worm queen, couldn't control other red worms, and couldn't lay eggs. Even if Saul stayed on Escaper Continent, it wouldn't be much use. On the other hand, with Kelly's side, after assigning tasks he had barely even asked about progress, except for when he returned last time and Kelly explained some experimental developments to him. But actually, this experiment was also very important. Before obtaining red worms, Saul had planned to use an army of bone monsters to resist the Abyssal Eye. Although he now had better options, the bone army couldn't be abandoned. Kelly obviously breathed a sigh of relief. That's wonderful. Wizard Brando and I have improved the combination plan of bone monsters and soul-fixing magic several times, creating 3 generations of bone monsters. But we don't know which type you're most satisfied with. After Kelly spoke for a while, she noticed Brando hadn't said anything and looked back puzzled, only to see Brando staring at Saul in a daze, his mouth slightly open under his helmet, as if he had seen something incredible. What's wrong? Kelly asked puzzledly. Saul knew what Brando was surprised about. As a third-rank wizard, his sensitivity to fourth-rank wizards was still quite high. Most importantly, Saul wasn't concealing his strength at all. Only Kelly, still a little second-rank, found both third-rank Saul and fourth-rank Saul to be unfathomably deep existences. But Kelly was very intelligent. After seeing the awe in Brando's eyes, she immediately realized something. She turned her head, her bronze-colored long hair flowing in the air. "Saul, you didn't advance to fourth rank, did you?" Saul shrugged. "I accidentally advanced." "You?" Kelly had just made one sound when she pressed her lips tightly together, her fair and tender face trembling slightly, her eyes reddening. Although she had long known that Saul wasn't far from fourth rank and would definitely become another legend in the wizard world. But how long had it been? How many years had it been? How the hell many years had it been? Special circumstances, I had no choice. If I didn't advance quickly, there wouldn't be enough time. Saul hadn't expected Kelly to react so strongly. Others would at most be shocked or disbelieving, but why did Kelly look somewhat aggrieved? Kelly took a deep breath, her chest rising, then slowly relaxed. "I'm fine." She took out the Chaos Realm compass. "Do you need to rest, or should we go see our results now?" After getting off the airship, Saul hadn't spent any time going through the ultra-long-distance teleportation array and Dwarf Valley, so he wasn't tired at the moment. "Let's go see them now." Kelly nodded, tugged at Brando to bring him back to his senses, then opened the Chaos Realm compass, instantly bringing the three of them together into the Chaos Realm. A gust of fierce wind blew toward them, stirring up a sandstorm 30 meters high. Just as the group was about to be buried by wind and sand, Saul raised his hand and waved, instantly stopping the fierce wind. The dust drew an arc forward under inertia before slamming hard into the ground, forming a small sandpile in front of Saul's feet. "Does the Chaos Realm have such strong winds?" "It didn't before." Brando finally came to his senses, carefully answering Saul, but his tone was obviously much more cautious than before. "But starting from half a year ago, the weather changes here have become increasingly severe, and extreme weather has begun appearing frequently." Noah's side even secretly came to ask me if we wanted to create some miracles to convert more Chaos Realm residents. It's indeed abnormal. This is a sealed continent. Although there are weather changes, without high mountains and great seas around, there shouldn't logically be such dramatic weather changes. Saul recalled the strong wind from just now. Could there be a leak somewhere? Chapter 995, The Reason for the Eruption. Saul followed Kelly to the Great Fissure. This was where most of the bone monsters were produced. Combined with several native forces controlled by Noah, the bone monsters under their control were becoming increasingly numerous. Beside the Great Fissure, Kelly had led several wizards and hundreds of natives in creating a massive experimental base. Inside the base stood rows of white skeletons in various forms and sizes, mostly in animal shapes, with occasional monsters that had never appeared even in the wizard world. These are all first-stage modified bones. The second and third stages involve further modifications based on the first stage. Besides higher strength and stronger stability, they've also achieved breakthroughs in 2 different directions. But Kelly and I can't determine which direction is better. Please come take a look. Brando spoke carefully, obviously still not recovered from the shock of Saul reaching fourth rank, his tone quite unsteady. "What are the 2 directions?" Saul asked as he walked. Kelly weakened the bone monster's combat power, but increased the number that can be controlled. I leaned toward enhancing strength, adopting an elite combat approach. The 2 had researched in 2 directions. No wonder they were hesitant. Of course, Saul could choose to modify certain quantities in both directions, but he still needed to decide which was primary and which secondary. The bone army here would become important assistants for the red worms. The research direction couldn't be decided by just slapping one's forehead. Saul followed Kelly and Brando separately to understand their modification plans. However, after seeing them, he also felt each had advantages and disadvantages, unable to decide immediately. Like this, you continue your own research, try to preserve the advantages while reducing the shortcomings. I'll go take a look over there first. The over there Saul mentioned was the other world at the very bottom of the Great Fissure. Saul had previously suspected that this chaos realm was exactly the Desetal continent that had once been swallowed by the Abyssal Eye, and outside the membrane wrapping the continent was somewhere within the Abyssal Eye. This made Saul suspect that this membrane was like the Abyssal Eye's stomach. Thinking this way, the Abyssal Eye had swallowed Desetal continent so many years ago, but still hadn't digested the continent, even allowing the continent here to regain vitality and form a new ecological system. So had the Abyssal Eye already developed indigestion? Master Gorsa said the Abyssal Eye was a corpse. Could a corpse still eat? Naturally, it couldn't digest anything. The Chaos Realm's deterioration could be seen as damage caused during Desetal continent's swallowing process. But no matter how indigestible, for the continent's living beings it was still a catastrophic disaster. The Chaos Realm's population was definitely less than 1% of the original. The current scale had developed slowly only after becoming the Chaos Realm. Saul jumped down the Great Fissure, landing at the lowest point, finding the gap again and extending his fate lines through it. Now that he had 4th rank wizard strength, plus the constant nourishment of the Symphony of Fate, his mental power was continuously growing even without meditation practice. His main body's fate lines were also constantly expanding, now able to cover a small town. This time, as soon as Saul's fate lines entered the abyss, he discovered his vision was much clearer than last time. Above was still the starry sky, and this time he could clearly see each star's light source. Saul could also distinguish that the starry sky here was different from the one outside the wizard world. If this was the internal world of the Abyssal Eye, the external starry sky definitely wasn't real. But even if it wasn't a real universe, it might be other planets swallowed by the abyss. After all, 6th rank wizards already had the ability to destroy a world. Even though he was now a corpse, didn't he still bring deadly threats to Saul's world? And this threat would become a real apocalypse in just a few years. Saul lowered his gaze, scanning the surrounding world. This place was somewhat like the moon's surface, with the earth covered in impact marks, everything around gray and dusty, with no signs of life visible. Within Saul's visible range, tens of thousands of white bone corpses already lay scattered about. Many of these corpses were incomplete, showing no signs of being able to move. But Saul knew these corpses were actually the anchor points that the wizard world greatly feared. The white bones located outside the stomach seemed to possess extremely strong pollution properties against lower-tier existences due to being tainted with 6th rank aura. They only behaved here. Once outside, they would become killing gods. Saul had once encountered an anchor point that suddenly appeared in the wizard world in the far north. Without erupting a storm eye, it just suddenly appeared, and when it left, it was also through a bizarrely appearing spatial fissure. This was a precursor to the Abyssal Eye's imminent complete eruption. "You came again." A white human skeleton appeared behind Saul. It was Camus, the only anchor point Saul had discovered so far that could actively communicate with him. "Have you decided to surrender to the abyss? I can guarantee that after being swallowed by the abyss, you'll still maintain your sanity. You can even continue attempting advancement here." This time Saul didn't immediately refuse but tentatively asked, "Is the abyss about to erupt?" The skeleton paused, then transmitted the next segment of information. "Trying to probe me. The skeleton gently shook its skull, trembling as if it might fall off. No need. You can see everything, but you can't stop anything. Although Saul heard only information rather than sound, he could already sense the contempt and pride in Camus's tone. Then Camus raised one hand, sweeping it backward. Let me show you, let you give up hope. After Camus raised his hand, the skeletons that had been lying quietly around suddenly began trembling one by one, as if consciousness was returning. They either propped themselves up with their arms or straightened their bodies, standing up shakily. One skeleton stood up, then thousands upon thousands of skeletons stood up. Like waves rising and falling on the sea surface, spreading in all directions, continuous and endless. Who exactly are you? You can't possibly be Wizard Camus. Such actions were beyond what a wizard who had mistakenly entered the abyss could accomplish. The skeleton before him didn't answer Saul's question. This doesn't matter. Soon, you'll all become part of the abyss, no longer needing independent identities. You mean the abyss will soon swallow the entire wizard world? This is the inevitable conclusion. Are you the Abyssal Eye's consciousness body? If you want to think of it that way, you can. The skeleton gave Saul no opportunity to probe. Then may I ask, why exactly does the abyss want to swallow the wizard world? All along, the great demon king always seemed destined to destroy the world. But aside from unconscious erosion and expansion, everything else should have a specific reason. Was it for living space, or deep-seated hatred, or perhaps for stronger authority and power? The skeleton before him clearly possessed clear consciousness and wasn't absolutely mad and chaotic, so his purpose should correspond to some initial desire. Saul wanted to know the reason. This concerned what countermeasures he should subsequently adopt. But the other party still didn't intend to reveal any information to Saul. When you humans step on ants, do you have any purpose? Saul slowly withdrew. You refuse to say anything, showing no sincerity whatsoever. I won't join you. This time the skeleton didn't mock again. He just quietly watched Saul leave. Returning to above the great fissure, Anne was waiting for him at the fissure's edge. Master, it's good that you've returned safely. Are there any new problems? Anne noticed Saul's expression wasn't very good and hurriedly stepped forward to inquire. Who would have thought that the next second, Saul would display a smile? It's nothing, Anne. I've actually confirmed what I was thinking. Camus refuses to say anything, but his attitude has already revealed everything. They have no other desires. They're determined to swallow the wizard world. But the abyss is already a corpse. What desires could a corpse have? Saul looked at Anne, but Anne didn't dare interject because of the word abyss. But Saul actively provided the answer. He wants to resurrect, of course. Chapter 996, Conditions for Resurrection. But in Saul's view, having confirmed the reason, he now had a targeted direction. He first found Kelly and Brando, who were waiting outside. Although the two had continued their experiments according to Saul's requirements, they were somewhat absent-minded. So when Saul called for them, they immediately put down their relatively unimportant work and hurried over. You have a conclusion so quickly? Kelly, being very familiar with Saul, naturally asked first. The specific action plan hasn't been finalized yet, but the overall direction is still primarily focused on increasing the number of bone armies under our control. No matter how strong individual bone monsters were, they couldn't be stronger than anchor points, so they wouldn't be the ones directly confronting the abyss. Kelly and Brando were confused, but still quite straightforwardly followed Saul's command. Meanwhile, Saul found a place to lie down, closed his eyes, and entered the prismatic world. The prismatic channel, 6 people gathered. This was the first time since Saul's advancement to 4th rank that all Symphony of Fate targets had assembled. Gorsa, this is your information transmission channel. Interesting. It can directly transmit consciousness information without information loss. Master Gorsa couldn't perceive that Saul was communicating with them from outside the wizard world, but could sense that information transmission had almost no obstacles. Master, this is the prismatic channel, where I communicate with 4 other friends through the connections we previously established. Shea, Master, haha, Saul, why are you calling the 5th person mentor? Gorsa, inverted tree. Shea just remembered something. I'll withdraw then. Shea naturally didn't have the ability to actively exit the chat platform, so could only huddle to one side pretending not to exist. I've invited everyone here today because there's something very important to discuss with everyone. This concerns the Abyssal Eye, so I hope everyone can analyze it together. Upon hearing about the Abyssal Eye, everyone fell silent. This time Saul directly informed everyone about the Chaos Realm and the abyss outside it, and shared his speculations. Seeing the scene inside the abyss, I believe Master's view that the abyss is actually a corpse is correct, and Camus's words represent that this corpse now wants to resurrect. So the key to us preventing the black tide eruption lies in how to prevent the Abyssal Eye from resurrecting. After Saul finished speaking, no one else spoke immediately. Saul wasn't in a hurry either, giving them time to digest this information. He had known about the relationship between the Abyssal Eye and Chaos Realm for several years and had long passed the shock phase. But the others, except for Master Gorsa, were learning this for the first time. Master Gorsa had stayed in the Chaos Realm for a while, but he wasn't clear that outside the Chaos Realm was actually the interior of the abyss that had nearly caused his complete aberration and madness. After a while, Gorsa spoke first. Gorsa, the Abyssal Eye I saw was different from what you saw, but this also suggests your speculation is very likely correct, because what you saw was the abyss interior, while I saw the outside. I just didn't expect that the abyss, which doesn't look very large, could actually contain an entire world inside. Saul said in a low voice, "This is the 6th rank we still can't understand." Saul already had some understanding of 5th rank. After all, he had used Payer as a coordinate to reach the prismatic world, and later relied on the platform the death demon created for him to travel back and forth several times. Now Saul had some practical insights into world barriers and world traversal. The death demon also seemed quite happy to let Saul travel frequently. Floco, the gap between 6th and 5th rank is much larger than between 5th and 4th rank. If 5th rank begins the wizard's transition from exploring their inner self to understanding the external world, 6th rank transforms this understanding into power. Master Gorsa didn't know Floco, so Saul privately informed him of the others' identities. But what somewhat surprised Saul was that even after learning Floco was an injured 5th rank, Gorsa didn't show much interest. He was actually more interested in Shea, who was about to advance to 3rd rank, and Mido, who had become 3rd rank in complete bewilderment. As for the sighing wall, Saul could only control it but couldn't communicate with it. Floco didn't know about Saul and Gorsa's private conversation, but upon learning that the abyss might erupt within a few years, he began generously sharing the information he knew. Floco, the power attribute of 6th rank is destruction. They see clearly the essence of how the world operates and know how to make that essence deteriorate. So when true 6th ranks destroy worlds, it's not crude demolition, but making them collapse from within. Therefore, merely pursuing the upper limits of power cannot lead to 6th rank advancement. Wizards go from pursuing knowledge to pursuing power, then back to pursuing knowledge. Saul sighed, everything had returned to the starting point. Shea finally spoke up in the serious discussion atmosphere. Shea, but don't 4th rank wizards achieve immortality? Why would 6th rank wizards still die? This time, Master Gorsa answered him. Gorsa, no life can exist eternally. Fourth rank immortality is only immortality under certain conditions, and resurrection when the foundation is undamaged. When the source of your power collapses, your life will enter its final act, like Wizard Murphy and Patriarch Norton. He also only has 1 or 2 years left now. Heh, I wonder if he wants to see the day of world's end. Death was always a heavy topic. Floco supplemented. Floco, fifth rank is the same. Even in terms of life level, the difference between fifth and fourth rank isn't that great. We just have broader vision. The knowledge we can pursue is also more abundant and mysterious, but such pursuit is also extremely dangerous, even more dangerous than when wizard apprentices first encounter knowledge. Because in the vast world, what you consider truth can be overturned at any time. Every intelligent being you encounter might want to overturn your knowledge system to verify their own. Each verification means progress in knowledge, and also means taking a step closer to sixth rank. Hearing this, Saul felt as if a light bulb suddenly lit up in his mind. Wait, Floco, do you mean that among fifth ranks, as long as one overturns another's knowledge system, they can destroy the other? Floco, you could say that. When traveling through different worlds, the operating rules of most worlds are different. Fifth ranks are those who can persist in their own inherent rules without being destroyed or assimilated by other worlds, thus maintaining self and continuing their journey. But if one's own cognition fails, fifth ranks will also completely mutated. Their physical bodies might continue existing due to their robustness, but their inner consciousness will go completely mad. It should be like this. When one's worldview is destroyed, the person naturally goes mad too. For wizards, existence without rationality is no different from death. Saul felt his heartbeat accelerating, though in the prismatic world he didn't need a heart at all. Then sixth rank is very likely similar to fifth rank. His death came from the collapse of essential cognition, and if he wants to resurrect, then he must rebuild his understanding of essence. Chapter 997. Give him a wrong answer. Red worms and bone armies were both defensive measures. They would fight against anchor points and other monsters and pollution emerging from the abyss. But after speculating about the method of sixth-rank resurrection, Saul and the others had a direction for solving the root problem. As for whether they could think of exact methods after having a direction, they could only continue exploring. Unlike Saul's excitement, the others all seemed somewhat silent. Shea, but how difficult it would be to destroy a sixth rank's understanding of essence. We don't even know what his understanding is, so how can we destroy it? After a brief silence, Gorsa somewhat understood Saul's intention. Gorsa, indeed difficult, but we're not trying to destroy a sixth rank's understanding. We're trying to prevent his resurrection. His understanding of essence should have already been destroyed, which is why he's in his current predicament. Floco also became excited. Floco, exactly. So what we need to do isn't destruction, but prevent him from rebuilding his understanding of the world. His constant devouring of the wizard world now should be an attempt to rebuild his understanding of essence by digesting the wizard world. Saul thought of Camus again. He could already manipulate the skeletons in the abyss. Did this represent that the dead sixth rank was gradually establishing new understanding? Shea was still habitually pessimistic. Shea, but how do we stop it? Not let the abyss continue devouring continents. That's no different from what we're doing now, is it? Gorsa, I suddenly remember something. These past few days I discussed red worms with Douglas, and I found one of his viewpoints very interesting. Floco, what did you say? Who? Douglas? Saul asked puzzledly. Floco, what's wrong? Why so terrified? Saul could almost hear Floco's heavy breathing. Floco, I'm somewhat sensitive to this name. I hope it's just a coincidence. Saul thought about Douglas's various abnormal and mysterious behaviors, intuitively feeling it wasn't just a coincidence. That Douglas he couldn't see through, and the Douglas that made Floco so frightened were very likely the same person. The Douglas we met appears to be a third-rank wizard, but he gives off a very composed, very calm feeling. Even when facing Alec, he showed no emotional changes. Saul had special experiences, backed by the diary and star-shaped eyes, giving him confidence to fight even fourth ranks. But for Douglas to be so composed, though he appeared very polite, gave people an indescribable strange feeling. Saul also didn't describe Douglas's appearance to Floco. After all, even a third-rank wizard could easily change their appearance. And mental power fluctuations couldn't be perfectly simulated. So Saul could only describe his feelings to Floco. Who would have thought that, after hearing this information, Floco was already certain of the other's identity? Floco, it can't be wrong, it's him. Douglas, a fifth-rank wizard who left the wizard world even earlier than I did. I heard he was only one step away from sixth rank. Saul closed his eyes. This news was shocking, yet also had a feeling of as expected. Then, why would Douglas disguise himself as a third-rank wizard to help us fight the Abyss? Floco smiled bitterly. Floco, I was severely injured by him last time, but I don't know why he suddenly stopped midway and spared my life. However, I think whatever he does, it's definitely for advancing to sixth rank. Shea, could his target be the Abyssal Eye? After all, that's a dead sixth rank. If his target really is the Abyssal Eye, that's not necessarily bad for us. A fifth-rank wizard wanting to become sixth rank definitely wouldn't refuse to study a sixth rank's corpse, right? Gorsa, if his goal is also sixth rank, then when he discussed red worms with me, he should have been deliberately hinting at me, giving me information on how to fight the Abyssal Eye. Everyone finally remembered Gorsa's unfinished words and became curious. Gorsa, he told me that the essence of methods to deactivate red worms is actually giving red worms an illusion, making them think they're already dead. Because red worms are very pure consciousness-based life forms, when they believe they've died, they enter a deactivated state, very similar to wizards with mental mutation whose bodies still survive. Saul nodded repeatedly. Now when he recalled any of Douglas's actions, he believed they all had specific deep meanings. Shea, does that Douglas want us to hint to the Abyss, make him think he's already dead? No, wait, the Abyss is already dead. Floco, this is just one line of thinking. We can't limit ourselves to life and death. Saul thought for a moment and said, maybe Douglas is hinting that we should give the Abyss a wrong answer, so his resurrection will fail. The Abyssal Eye wanted to resurrect by rebuilding understanding of essence. But what if this understanding was built incorrectly? Then he definitely couldn't resurrect. The prismatic channel fell quiet again for a moment. Shea, this isn't easy either. False understanding is easy to fabricate, but false understanding that could make a sixth rank believe it's correct, that's not easy to make. Gorsa remained optimistic. Gorsa, deceiving a sixth rank isn't easy, but deceiving a sixth rank who's already mad isn't impossible. Yes, and the Abyss is desperately wanting to resurrect now. Camus is getting more anxious each time. I seriously suspect that actually the Abyss doesn't have much time left either. Once past a certain limit, he'll permanently lose the ability to resurrect. So he'll very likely grasp at every opportunity to try. Floco, a drowning person wants to grab any piece of driftwood. He won't care whether that driftwood can bear his weight. So from now on, while everyone defends against the black tide, we also need to find a suitable lie. Shea, I don't need to write. I'm just a little second rank. Gorsa, don't worry. A fool's thinking can sometimes enlighten the wise. It's precisely because you know nothing that you can jump out of limitations and imagine without restraint. Shea, I feel like you're insulting me, but I don't dare insult you back. So annoying. Saul couldn't help but chuckle lightly. Good, so none of us can give up. You can also discuss this problem with others without revealing the abyss's secrets. After disconnecting, Gorsa sat up from his pink sofa. Interesting communication method. He rubbed his forehead, feeling no discomfort. This communication method actually exceeded his understanding of consciousness communication. But since it was something Saul had created, Gorsa could only say he was used to it. He touched his bandage-wrapped chin, tilted his head, and began thinking about the assignment Saul had given everyone. Great, now the master had to complete the apprentice's homework in reverse. After thinking for a while without any ideas, Gorsa directly teleported to Douglas's side, who was doing experiments at the Star Observatory Tower. Douglas wore a white wizard robe, holding two beakers, still with his composed expression. Is there something? How do you think we can prevent the abyss from erupting? Gorsa was sometimes very stubborn, but sometimes very good at adaptation. For example, now he came to find Douglas with the intention of copying answers. Chapter 998, Showdown. He shook the beaker in his hand. The liquid inside instantly turned red, then quickly became transparent again. Gorsa walked over and took the beaker from Douglas's right hand, giving it a gentle shake himself. The liquid in the beaker also turned red for an instant, then quickly returned to transparent. Are you helping to weaken the Worm Queen's consciousness? Is this also giving it an illusion? Yes, for pure consciousness entities, this is the simplest and most effective method. It's just a pity that no matter how powerful the Worm Queen is, it can't directly eliminate the abyss. Douglas suddenly put down the beaker in his hands as well, adjusted his wizard robe, leaned against the experimental table and looked at Gorsa with leisure. You know who I am now. How did you find out? Gorsa was startled, not expecting the other to be so direct. I thought you would continue pretending until you gave an answer. Douglas showed no panic at having his disguise exposed. The disguise was only to prevent you from completely relying on me and stop thinking for yourselves, coming to me for answers. I'm just a fifth-rank wizard with no path to advancement. How could I have 100% certainty of solving a sixth rank? This sounded like he was mocking Gorsa for directly asking him for answers, but Gorsa felt no shame whatsoever. You want to guide us to follow your line of thinking step by step, but now you say you don't want us to completely rely on you. Only Shea would believe such a lame lie, Gorsa thought to himself, his bandaged face hiding all his expressions. Oh, I know, Douglas remembered something. You know Floco, don't you? Met him once. As long as it didn't connect to Saul, Floco could be sold out. Douglas shook his head helplessly. When I appeared back then, I originally wanted to kill him, but there was a problem and I didn't get the chance to strike. At that time, I thought you might discover my identity because of this. I just didn't expect it to be so soon. When Douglas mentioned wanting to kill Floco, his tone was casual, as if he wasn't talking about killing a fifth rank but eating an apple. Gorsa pressed forward. If you really wanted to solve the Abyssal Eye, why would you want to kill Floco? He's still a fifth-rank existence. Wouldn't it be good to keep him around to help you? Douglas chuckled lightly, because I don't necessarily have to solve the Abyssal Eye. If killing Floco brought greater benefits than the Abyssal Eye, I would naturally strike at him. The reason I ultimately spared his life was precisely to solve the Abyss problem. Then what exactly do you want to do? Surely you didn't suddenly develop a kind heart and want to save your homeland. Of course not, Douglas admitted readily. I just want to observe a sixth rank's death. Since you've met Floco, you should know I've been trapped at fifth rank peak for a very, very long time. If I can closely observe a sixth rank's annihilation and fall, the knowledge gained in the process might help me advance. Being stuck at sixth rank's threshold, I finally realized that power and such are all illusions. Only knowledge is eternal. Knowledge is power. Unfortunately, It took me a long time and many failed experiments to realize this. Douglas looked at Gorsa, his smile having disappeared. Now you should understand why I stayed to help you, right? My understanding is that you want us to directly confront the abyss and prevent its resurrection, while you observe the sixth rank's annihilation from a third-person perspective to gain knowledge from it. To obtain secrets about sixth rank essence through observation, you naturally can't be distracted, so you can't act directly. You can only guide us. Gorsa said lazily, but I still hope you'll guide us more clearly, since we don't have much time left. Although this is a matter of life and death for us, for you, closely observing a sixth rank's death is also a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Since there was demand, cooperation could be negotiated. Facing a veteran fifth rank, Gorsa showed no fear at all. You're right, but haven't we been cooperating all along? Douglas walked to Gorsa's side and gently patted his shoulder. As for the guidance progress, don't trouble yourself with that. Just be my good little lab rats. I'll try my best to keep you alive. After saying this, Douglas left the laboratory, while Gorsa remained standing in place without moving. Until a second-rank wizard saw Gorsa standing alone in the laboratory and approached with confusion to ask for instructions. Council Chairman, do you have any orders? However, the next second, Gorsa's figure suddenly disappeared, completely ignoring the second-rank wizard. The second-rank wizard awkwardly touched his nose, but didn't take Gorsa's sudden disappearance to heart. The new chairman could teleport and had a famously strange temper. If he didn't acknowledge people, so be it. But what this second-rank wizard didn't know was that as soon as Gorsa teleported back to the exclusive spherical room of the Stargate Council chairman, he violently spat out a mouthful of black blood. When that mouthful of black blood hit the ground, it was still rolling and boiling, as if something was fighting inside it. Gorsa collapsed to the ground and slowly closed his eyes. Just now, when Douglas patted him twice, the cells in his body began launching suicidal attacks on each other. Until he used resurrection magic to quickly reconstruct the flesh under his bandages, did he isolate those cells that were still killing each other and spit them out. The black blood on the ground was still fighting. You bite me, I devour you. That mass of blood became smaller and smaller until only a pile of shriveled black powder remained. Extremely powerful death force. Only then did Gorsa slowly open his eyes. No wonder he's so interested in a sixth rank's death. A few days later, Gorsa privately discussed this matter with Saul in the prismatic channel. Through the symphony of fate, Saul had already discovered that Gorsa had survived a life-and-death crisis and provided him with a massive surge of destiny power. He had only waited a few days before actively contacting him, worried about affecting Gorsa's recovery. Learning that Douglas had directly revealed his cards to Gorsa also surprised Saul. After pondering for a moment, Saul asked, "Master, do you think what Douglas said is true?" Gorsa, I think it's 90% believable, but the 10% he's hiding is what's most crucial for us. What would a fifth-rank wizard who had long since left the wizard world and had no need to wade into these muddy waters have to hide? Unless what he was hiding would seriously damage Saul and the others' interests, or their lives. Could Douglas be treating us like another type of red worm, preparing to drag us along to die? Saul speculated. Gorsa, if that's the case, then it's not unacceptable. Was Master Gorsa so selfless? After thinking about it, Saul shook his head again. No, it should be that Master Gorsa simply believed he wouldn't die. He was the tough guy who personally entered the abyss believing he could return. Chapter 999, Testing and Improvement. After returning to the Chaos Realm, Saul decided to start with testing the bone monsters. Kelly and Brando had now focused their research direction on enhancing the controllability of bone monsters. Saul took 10 newly manufactured bone monsters and returned to the Black Desert where there were no people nearby. Here, he took out the anchor point that had resided in his left hand for a long time from the space created by the Symphony of Fate. Now as a fourth rank, when Saul felt the anchor point at close range again, he noticed that inside the anchor point was actually a kind of constantly changing fluctuation. It wasn't static. But this change also had patterns. Once the pattern was broken, it would cause the pollution inside the anchor point to spread outward. The pollution fluctuations that spread to the outside world had extremely strong infectivity, or rather, they were very domineering fluctuations that would forcibly change others' fluctuations. This was also why Firefly Lord Herbert had immediately mutated and died the instant he was touched by the anchor point. Anchor points came from 6th rank wizards. Even if just a fragment, they still had 4th rank level. For it to assimilate a 3rd rank wizard, it would naturally directly change the 3rd rank wizard into something even he couldn't recognize. If an anchor point assimilates a wizard near the Abyssal Eye can smoothly absorb this wizard. But the mutated wizard only changes externally. Their essence hasn't changed. What the Abyssal Eye wants should be a wizard's essential composition. To understand essence, analysis of a single quantity was definitely insufficient. So the Abyssal Eye needed to absorb an entire world, then conduct statistical analysis to establish new cognition for its resurrection. However, this was also very dangerous. In haste, though for Saul it had actually been hundreds of years, the essence sought was very likely to contain relatively obvious fallacies, and once such fallacies were targeted by someone, it might die again. Is this the defensive measure by which the Abyssal Eye sealed the wizard world, preventing the world from producing 5th rank wizards again? That is to say, the Abyssal Eye is actually also afraid of enemies appearing. Having confirmed his line of thinking, Saul waved his hand and created a temporary laboratory in the Black Desert. The walls, tables, and chairs in the laboratory were all composed of inertized black powder, minimizing the influence of experimental equipment on anchor points and bone monsters. Then Saul numbered one of the bone monsters as 1, placed it on the newly created experimental table, and picked up the anchor point to approach 1. Saul's mental power was also constantly extended, while he also extended an invisible fate line around the area to observe whether there were other forces different from pollution fluctuations. Last time the anchor point had reacted when touching an enemy. This time, under Saul's careful observation, he discovered that as soon as the anchor point appeared in the laboratory, 1 immediately reacted. This reaction manifested as polluting fluctuations appearing inside the bone monster, the kind that only appeared after entering the wizard world. The fluctuations were small and didn't scatter outside the body. Saul continued approaching with the anchor point. When half a meter away from the bone monster, the fluctuations inside the bone monster were drawn outside and produced weak resonance with the anchor point's fluctuations. Saul waited 5 minutes without discovering any signs of the resonance strengthening. So he moved the anchor point closer to the bone monster again, separately observing the bone monster's reactions when the anchor point was 30 centimeters, 20 centimeters, and 10 centimeters away. As the anchor point continuously approached, the bone monster would continuously strengthen the fluctuations it emitted, but the resonance with the anchor point's pollution fluctuations didn't increase at the same proportion. So what the soul-fixing arrays truly fix is this resonance ability. Saul nodded, satisfied with the current effects of the soul-fixing magical arrays. The resonance's killing power was extremely strong. If the resonance could be broken, they might be able to directly become immune to anchor point pollution. But this was extremely difficult. Being able to reduce resonance was already quite remarkable. Although those 5th rank and above boss wizards from ancient times were no longer in this world, the things they occasionally left behind were still very useful. After completing the close-range test, Saul directly pressed the anchor point against the bone monster. With this contact, the bone monster immediately changed color, gradually turning gray from the point of contact, its appearance moving closer to the black tide monsters in the abyss. But before the bone monster could completely transform into an anchor point's appearance, its entire body collapsed, becoming a pile of unresponsive sand. Saul continued recording. From the bone monster's reaction, anchor points are indeed assimilating everything they contact. But most things, during the initial stages of assimilation, directly perish because they can't bear the new fluctuations and their own compositional structure is broken. The research results were similar to Saul's previous speculation, leaving him in good spirits. At least it showed that the direction of the path he was currently taking was correct. Bone monsters themselves are products after abyss pollution and have certain similarities to anchor points, so they lasted longer than third-rank wizards would. But they're not anchor points after all, and their strength is insufficient, which is why they collapsed before being completely assimilated. Next, Saul took out a bone monster improved by Brando to enhance strength, numbered 2. When conducting the anchor point experiment again, Saul discovered that 2's flexibility and strength hardness were both higher than 1's, but its resistance to anchor points was actually about the same as 1's. Brando hasn't contacted anchor points after all, and his understanding of black tide pollution can't catch up to Kelly's. So when he conducted modifications, he still referenced characteristics of becoming stronger in the wizard world. But what good did being stronger do? Could it reach 4th rank? Alec and the others could also contain anchor points for experiments, but didn't 4th rank Master Gorsa, after entering the abyss full of anchor points, also nearly get completely polluted? The key is still in soul fixing. The less resonance bone monsters produce, the better. Then the more numerous they are, the longer they can persist in front of anchor points. Saul took out the remaining 8 bone monsters to experiment with them all, with consistent results. After completing the experiments, he put away the anchor point, raised his hand to push down the entire temporary laboratory, and buried it deep in the black desert to prevent residual pollution fluctuations from affecting his own people. Then his figure flashed, and he returned to the great fissure. Kelly and Brando were busy in the laboratory. Completely abandon Brando's improvement plan. Focus all efforts on increasing the number of bone monsters we can control. I'll also continue improving the effects of soul-fixing magical arrays. Contact me immediately if you have any progress or discoveries. Upon hearing this, Brando's mouth twitched slightly, but he could only nod. It's just that his efforts from the past half-year had all been wasted, which was somewhat heartbreaking. But he had no temper even in front of third-rank Saul, let alone 4th rank. So he obediently went to assist Kelly, first learning how to improve bone monsters using Kelly's method. Meanwhile, Kelly ran up to Saul, grabbed his arm and turned him around. "Saul, can you directly contact anchor points?" Saul looked into Kelly's eyes and slowly nodded. Kelly looked up at Saul seriously, her eyes shining. "Can you modify me? Modify me into a body that can contact anchor points." Chapter 1000, All Hands on Deck. While Saul continued to study the soul-fixing magic circle, the Wall of Sighs and the Red Sea once again welcomed the black tide. However, this time, anchor point monsters appeared in the Red Sea and directly devoured 3 high-rank wizards. To prevent the anchor point's powerful pollution from spreading, Black Flame Emperor Elo urgently contacted Saul, then released the imprisoned Frim. The two worked together, one to stop the anchor point, one to protect Mido, persisting for a day and night until Saul arrived and immediately subdued the anchor point monster. When Saul was 3rd rank, he had no way to deal with anchor point monsters, but at 4th rank he could already seal the Anchor Point monster's pollution and collect it into his own space. Only Frym, who had fought the Anchor Point monster at close range, saw Saul's action this time. He had originally had some thoughts after being released, but seeing Saul efficiently take away the Anchor Point monster he had never seen before, he immediately realized that the current Saul had completely surpassed him. It was right to entrust it to you. Frym was referring to the golden thread he had given to Saul. But he didn't know that it had originally been a golden page belonging to the diary. It's just that for some reason, this page's power was somewhat stronger than other golden pages. With the Anchor Point monster taken away by Saul, the black tide immediately receded. Frym floated in the air somewhat awkwardly. He had been temporarily released by the tribunal to protect the Red Sea. Now that the black tide had receded so quickly, would Saul put him back in the maze corridor? Just as Frym was secretly considering whether to flee first, Saul spoke. "Chief Frym doesn't want to study me anymore, does he?" Frym looked at Saul, seeing the smile on his face, and felt a chill down his back. The chief, who had been proud all his life, slowly lowered his head. He knew this was Saul asking for a promise, and also for an attitude. "Now you're the main force against the black tide. If you need me to do anything, you can tell me any time." This was tantamount to submission. To ask Frym to lower himself further would be too much for him. This satisfied Saul. Saul returned to shore, and Alo also emerged from the defensive array. Seeing Frym following behind Saul, his emotions were incredibly complex. To divert attention and avoid mutual awkwardness, Alo immediately discussed business with Saul. "This is our first time encountering an Anchor Point monster, but I heard the Sighing Wall has encountered one before." Saul nodded. "At that time, it was also my first encounter with an Anchor Point monster, even more powerful than the anchor points we obtained in the borderland. Most importantly, it actively attacks people and selects targets." Both Alo and Frym frowned. One Anchor Point monster had directly occupied the energy of 2 4th-rank wizards. If there were more Anchor Point monsters, could they slice Saul up? Saul took out a metal nameplate, inscribed with his newly designed soul-fixing magical array. "This is a magical array I've been researching recently. It can provide wizards with more protection under black tide pollution. If you can continue improving the array above, we can continue sharing information and resources. If anything comes up, you can communicate with me through Mido." "So you can directly communicate with Mido?" Royer, standing far away, muttered internally. He knew Saul wouldn't simply hand over such a unique method of controlling Red Sea trees as Mido, but they had no better choice at the time. Alo and Frym took the magical array. With just one glance, they realized how important this array was. Seeing that the tribunal's side had no problems, Saul immediately left without meeting anyone else. Afterward, Saul also made a trip to the Sighing Wall. Those who had been trapped here by Wizard Murphy had grown accustomed to life here. Thanks to Saul's help, these people weren't completely trapped in Far North City. They could leave, but because their lives were connected to the Sighing Wall, whenever black tides occurred, they still had to return to fight together. Saul also left soul-fixing magical arrays here, having Maria and several high-rank wizards jointly research and deploy them. However, these magical arrays were basically purely defensive, too passive. In Saul's view, to resist the black tide eruption in a few years, they still needed to rely on red worms for active offense and find ways to completely cut off the Abyssal Eye's hope of resurrection. He not only delivered magical arrays to the main forces fighting the black tide, but also didn't neglect some inland countries and wizard factions. The Stargate Council was responsible for promotion on Escaper Continent, while the Tribunal handled Nefret. As for Stat Continent, Saul had wizards who had already submitted to the Purity Wizard Tower spread the word everywhere. The current borderland was no longer a forbidden zone. Soul-fixing magical arrays were first deployed in various dangerous areas, making many places even safer than the outside world. The wizards here naturally no longer needed to be stationed long-term in settlements and could move around freely. So Saul sent them out to various countries on Stat Continent to deploy soul-fixing magical arrays. Of course, the raw materials for these arrays still needed to be prepared by local forces. Otherwise, no matter how wealthy and powerful Saul was, he couldn't cover an entire continent. His faction had only been established for a few years after all, and he had never seriously managed it. The faction's scope and strength naturally couldn't compare to the other two major forces. By the time wizard factions across all three continents were enthusiastically constructing defensive facilities, according to Saul's soul-fixing magical arrays, Saul had quietly returned to the Purity Wizard Tower and entered the Chaos Realm again. This time, he planned to directly find anchor points in the Chaos Realm for experiments. The anchor point monster that Saul had sealed into his personal space at the Red Sea had actually merged with the original anchor point fragment inside, while Saul wasn't paying attention. When Saul discovered the anchor point was missing, he immediately examined the motionless sea snake-shaped anchor point monster that was playing dead. Then he discovered that the sea snake had grown a horn. He immediately informed everyone about this through the prismatic channel. Mido, the tribunal wizards told me that the anchor points in their collection have never shown signs of fusion. Gorsa, the anchor points on the Stargate Council side have basically been divided multiple times, but even when put back together, there are no signs of fusion. The problem should lie with the anchor point monsters that have aggressive consciousness. Saul was very cautious. If it's just simple fusion, that's not a big problem. I'm just worried about whether there might be qualitative changes when they fuse to a certain quantity. Gorsa, are you thinking of going to the abyss? Saul thought of his prophetic dream and felt uneasy. He didn't want to fail in the end because he overlooked a detail. He didn't want to helplessly watch all three continents ultimately become sacrifices for the abyss's resurrection. Yes, I plan to truly make a trip into the abyss. Saul mustered the courage to say this. This was a very dangerous decision. Saul planned to transform into his Fate Line main body form and completely enter the abyss beneath the Great Fissure to truly explore that world. After waiting a moment, the dead wizard's diary unexpectedly issued no death warning whatsoever. Not even a crisis warning.